Let's kickstart this event. I want to first say thank you all for joining. Thank you for agreeing to give us your time. And thank you all the registrants as well that are currently here. We're excited to have you and excited to hear all of your questions. The reason behind starting this or doing this conference in the first place is to allow students at Harvard GST, especially Arab students or students from MENA, to discuss things that they've learned over the years, especially the past year, on climate change and resiliency in their own home countries or region. So I would like to personally thank all the Arab students that are joining us, and I'm excited to hear and learn from all of our panelists, like they are as well. I want to first introduce our moderator for the first panel, Karim El-Jindi. This conference wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for his help. He doesn't enjoy a lot of introductions, so I'll make this brief. I actually met Karim almost 2 years back at an MIT conference where he also spoke on a similar topic. And I've been kind of trying to work with him on certain things, especially under Carboun. And a few of you that know Karim and Carboun, just to give a quick overview on his work there. He started an initiative, an advocacy initiative promoting sustainability in the cities of the Middle East and North Africa. So I'd like to thank him for that. I'm super happy to be a part of that as well. And yeah, Karim is also a sustainability consultant and an architect, of course, based in London, working at Dar al-Handase. And most recently, he has become an associate fellow at the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Chatham House. So no further introduction necessary, I think. Karim, if you'd like to take it over. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you, Natasha, for the kind introduction, and thank you for making it as painless as possible. And thank you all for making the time to join us today. It's my pleasure to introduce this exciting two-day event on climate change and sustainability in the MENA region, a subject I feel quite passionately about. So climate change and climate action, especially in the context of cities, has become a pressing issue that deserves more discussions like this, like the conference. So thanks for everyone involved in putting this together. Cities are both highly vulnerable to climate change and an indispensable part of the solution. And as we become more urbanized, as we become more as populations grow and as we approach the net zero deadline that we've set for ourselves by mid-century, and as our climate aspirations rise, the role of cities becomes more prominent and more evident in our eyes. And in the MENA region, cities are no less critical to climate action and to climate change. If anything, in this highly urbanized region, 2/3 of us live in cities. Cities play an even bigger role. And we must not forget that human settlements in the most parts of this region, in the most parts of the MENA region, have emerged against a backdrop of quite fragile environmental conditions. They emerged only in a few locations that could sustain them, and then they only grew as much as can be supported by their immediate hinterlands, the areas surrounding the cities, producing enough biocapacity to sustain it. But with industrialization over the last century or so, cities of the region, like most of the world, they've changed their consumption patterns. From consuming what was readily available in their hinterland, what was renewable in their hinterlands, to consuming what was financially affordable, regardless of where it came from, with an obvious environmental footprint. So if we factor in population growth, we will end up with a picture where human settlements in this region have ended up with an environmental footprint that far exceeds its ecological capacity to sustain them. And you can all understand how precarious that situation can be. So in parts of this region, the situation is even more unique. The parts of this region, there is virtually no ecological capacity to start with. Human settlements there only existed due to the financial ability to import water, to import food, to import biocapacity, and even make the indoor climate more comfortable, or in some cases too comfortable. And climate change and its impacts are an added risk to this precarious condition in the MENA region. The physical impacts on the ecosystems, on agriculture, on cities, on infrastructure, as well as the cascading impacts that come from those impacts on social development and economic development, are all expected to put too much pressure on an already overburdened system. So a system that I don't need to remind you is already creaking under the weight of increased resource consumption, increased population growth, and rising urbanization. The region is not particularly responsible for greenhouse gas emissions and anthropogenic climate change, in my opinion. That historic responsibility, in my mind, lies with major European and North American economies over the last 2 centuries. But that is not an excuse for inaction, unfortunately, since we're all literally in this together. Anyone who has been to the MENA region knows how susceptible most of it is to further increases in temperature. And anyone who has been to the MENA region, especially the areas where it actually gets precipitation, where it does rain, knows that areas such as the Mediterranean coastline, maybe the Levant or North Africa, where it does actually receive some rain, knows that what would then change to the climate due to it in terms of reduction in precipitation. The places that do actually get rainfall are uniquely expected to have less rainfall and less snowfall, unlike most regions in the world. So what should countries of the region do? What should cities of the region do? What should people of the region do? Should they brace and adapt to climate change as an inevitability, put all their energies into doing this? Should they work on mitigating it, but doing the hard work that is required to mitigate it, even at the risk of failure due to inaction by others, because not everyone is on board yet. And also there's a risk of having a negative impact, their fragile economic development as a result of taking this action. You could argue that these two are not contradictory, but the risk remains there. Or should the plans be drawn up to abandon cities that are expected to be less inhabitable in the future? Is that even an option for us as we plan for a future with climate change? Or should the region build spaceship-like human settlements that exist despite of their environments, not in harmony with their environments? These are some of the questions on my mind, and I'm sure that there are many more in your minds as well. So to discuss all of this, we have 4 great panels over the course of today and tomorrow. Let's start with 2 panels today, which will cover climate change, the challenge itself, the climate, as well as climate action in the MENA region. That includes both mitigation and adaptation, as well as some different solutions to climate change that involves the role of public policy, governments, private sector and technology, as well as the civil society. Tomorrow, we'll zoom in on the role of cities and planning, as well as buildings. One panel is dedicated to urban sustainability and urban resilience, and then the second panel explores the role of sustainable building design. We have an excellent lineup of speakers for you today and tomorrow, some of the best and most knowledgeable and most experienced people on the subject. And I'll start by introducing the 4 speakers on this panel, which I have the honor to moderate. Our first speaker, this is in no particular order. First speaker is Dr. Mary Lumi. She's a policy-oriented social scientist. She studies climate change, energy transitions, and sustainable development policy in the Gulf, as well as globally for the last 15 years. She currently works as a research fellow at CAPSARC, and she holds a PhD from the Middle East, PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from Durham University. I've known Marie professionally since 2011 and enjoyed reading her 2012 book. It was an eye-opener for me, and I would recommend reading her publications to all those interested in climate change in the region. Second speaker is Roba Adjour, is a manager of climate change studies at the RSS, Royal Scientific Society in Jordan. She manages and implements projects relating to climate change and participates in awareness campaigns locally within Jordan. She's also responsible for communication. She holds a master's degree in environmental science from the University of Jordan. I've had the pleasure to meet Roba at one of the UN climate negotiations conferences. I cannot remember which one. And Roba, it's a pleasure to meet you again. Third speaker is Dr. Aisha Al-Sarihi, and she's a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C., and she's also a research associate with Marie at CAPSARC in Riyadh. Her research focuses on political economy of environmental sustainability, energy policy, renewables, and climate policies in the Arab world. She holds a PhD from Imperial College London, and I personally had the pleasure of meeting her a few years ago, well, attending one of her lectures. I'm sure she didn't notice me when she gave a presentation at the LSE, London School of Economics, a few years ago. And I look forward to hearing her remarks. The last but not least is Tanzid Alam, who is a managing director of Earth Matters Consulting. It's a consultancy firm, and he's an expert on climate change. He's a government policy reviewer, previously worked as an advisor for energy and climate change at the UK's Independent Scientific Academy, and as well as the Royal Society. His work including leading work on the Zayed Sustainability Prize. He developed Masdar's report on renewable energy desalination. He worked on Dubai's climate change adaptation strategy, and he holds a master's degree in conservation from UCL, University College London. And again, thank you all for joining us today, all the speakers. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Baser Wardam, could not join us today due to unforeseen circumstances, but I'm sure we'll catch up with him at another time. And just before we start, feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, and we'll respond to them in the order they're received after the panel time permitting. So let's start by setting the stage, and I'll start with the brutal reality: climate impacts. What will happen, or what do we expect to happen? Sounds much simpler than it actually is. So in general terms, I'll ask the question first, and I'll perhaps propose some speakers, but anyone who's happy to jump in after that, feel free to do this. I want this to be closer to a fireside chat as possible. So in general terms, what environmental and economic stresses is climate change expected to worsen or exacerbate in the MENA region? And I would love to hear Tanzid's view on this, and as well as Aisha, but if anyone else wants to add anything after that, please feel free to do this. So Tanzid, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kareem, and thank you everyone for inviting me. I apologize for being late joining and raising blood pressure for you, Kareem.
You want to do it in a minute?
Yeah. but yeah, so I'm here now, so I'll do my best to answer the questions today, and good colleagues here who can fill in blanks and complement and so on. Look, I've been in the region now for 13 years. Working on climate change issues, and in that time there's been more and more, at the time then the IPCC reports used to have big gray areas over the region in terms of science and knowledge and research. So this is from 2006 and onwards, basically. And that's slowly beginning to be filled with those gaps in our knowledge. And there are still gaps. The knowledge isn't perfect. There's issues with investment in research and so on, and which we can get into later. But the main impacts are kind of similar to what you see elsewhere. Heat stress. We're already seeing historically a lot of heat stress and heat waves in the region. Just yesterday, while I was writing a policy brief for UNEP and for the region on climate change. And in that policy brief, I was just reading some reports about the 2016 heat wave that hit the region, where temperatures hit 44 degrees C in Kuwait in, I think it was June or July 2016, and Iraq in Basra, it hit kind of 53 degrees, hottest ever recorded basically in 2016. But it was not just a one-off, but it was consecutive days of really high temperatures, and it happened throughout that summer. And that is happening more often. That's projected to happen more often. So, it's easy to think, oh, it's a little bit hotter, what does that mean? But actually people who work outdoors are severely at risk from that. Construction workers, for example, anyone who doesn't have the privilege of being able to go into a nice air-conditioned office space to escape the heat is at risk. The elderly are at risk, the young are at risk from heat stress. So some of these basic things, and then heat itself knocks into other sorts of impacts. So heat causes building materials to be more stressed. So that could increase your, with kind of contraction and expansion and contraction of the materials. It puts more stress on the concrete and the built environment, tarmac as well. And that causes increased costs in terms of maintenance of the buildings and the lifespan of the buildings and the infrastructure that you put in place. So that has a direct economic impact, and those sorts of issues will affect things. Also, flash flooding is that's happening more and more in urban environments because they're not really built to cope with increased kind of high levels of precipitation in a short period of time that you get in storms, basically. So in Jeddah, for example, in 2009 and 10 and 11, it's been estimated the floods there cost between $3 to $5 billion. And that's because the city was just not built or was not built to cope with those floods and had not planned how to deal with that. People did not get emergency messages to say, stay indoors, don't travel to work today. So there was a lot of people don't go to work, and then it has an economic impact. There are lives lost as a result as well. And so some of these sorts of issues, climate change is already exacerbating in the region, and it's projected to further in the future. We're going to see more storms and events. Already in Oman, there's been some evidence with Cyclone Gonu and Cyclone, another more recent one that happened, that they're becoming more intense and frequent. So I was speaking to a friend who's a meteorologist at the GCC Secretariat recently, and he's got evidence which is pointing out how much more intense these events are getting, and that has major economic impacts. So, you know, and also it causes deaths. So these sorts of issues are becoming more prevalent, and it's something that requires good national security planning and prioritization beyond your traditional ministries of climate change or environment. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Aisha, do you want to add to this? And if anyone else after Aisha wants to jump in.
Right. Yeah, so first I want to thank you very much. I think it is timely because we are leading up to the COP26 to have this kind of conversation. For me, in terms of the climate stressors in the MENA region, I think what I would do, I would reiterate what Tanzid have said and what you, Karim, also have said. Obviously, it is the heat stress, the rising temperature, and the water scarcity when it comes to the MENA region and the impact of the climate change in the MENA region. But one thing that I want to point to when we speak about the MENA region, we need to also recognize that the MENA region consists of a heterogeneous group of countries where they have different differences in their, natural resources, their wealth, and their stages of the development. So the impact of the climate change, although the MENA region shares too many things in common, the impacts of the climate change might differ from one country to another. But also, as mentioned, the MENA region is sharing the geographical location. And at the same time, it shares many things in common, like the language, the culture, which could help actually to find solutions to the climate change. And also as to the impacts of the climate change, the MENA region, yes, it faces a common challenge, which is the rising temperature and the water scarcity. But I'm not gonna repeat this, but I'm gonna speak a little bit more about what trickled down with those two challenges. So with the rising temperature, what we need here in the MENA region is cooling. And this has been, I would say the MENA region has been successful in addressing this challenge in terms of cooling. But also when we find solutions, we need to think about the risks and the issues that arise with those solutions. So for cooling, you need to think about where the energy is coming from. So for the MENA region, most of the energy that is used to for cooling is coming from either oil and gas. And here you actually increase the domestic consumption of the energy, and there's chances to rise the issue of the energy security in the region. And when it comes to the rising temperature, it also leads to, as Tanzid mentioned, low precipitation rates and low rainfall. And that actually leads to lowering the productivity of other essential economic sectors like the agriculture sector. So some of the MENA countries, not all of them, rely on the agriculture as a source of income and as also a source of a source for the food production in the region. But with the impact of the climate change, we actually exacerbate the issue of the food security in the region. And for the MENA region, almost half of the food is imported for the region. And so with the climate change, actually, you need to think not only at the impacts of it domestically, but also internationally. So since the MENA region is also importing food from outside, you need to think how the climate change is affecting other countries where we import the food from. So I wanted from mentioning this that we need to think in a collective manner and from a systematic perspective when we think about the challenges of the climate change as well as the solutions, because they are all connected to each other. And we shouldn't separate one aspect from another, and we shouldn't separate the MENA region from the outside world.
Great, thank you, Aisha. I think you've led us nicely into our next topic. The issue of differentiation, the impacts are differentiated, even though there are general trends, there are variations. And the question is here, how do you compare different climate impacts, like temperature increases, precipitation reduction, or variability in rainfall, or extreme weather events, or sea level rise? They're hard to compare. But if we take them, all of them collectively, do we think there are any particular parts of this region that are more vulnerable to environmental and economic impacts of climate change? And the question here, I think I would direct to Marie and to Ruba first, and as to what in your mind is the areas that are most vulnerable to climate change, if we manage to collectively consider all these different impacts and their cascading impacts as well, like loss of agricultural productivity, impacts on comfort and heat stress, etc. So over to you, Marie.
So good afternoon, everybody. Ramadan Kareem, greetings from Riyadh, and great to be here. I will build very much on what Tanzi just spoke about, the physical impacts of climate change, and the points that Aisha made about food security being kind of an indirect link to climate risks, and the fact that you need to think about this holistically. I very much agree on that. So I'll propose a few concepts that I think help understand the region and framework for understanding adaptation and climate impacts in the region. So the starting point, as was pointed out, is that it's a very diverse region, and most already are arid countries with scarce natural water resources, but there are huge differences in resilience and adaptive capacity. And this is largely divided along income level lines. So you have even oil producers that have very low adaptation capability, like Iraq, for example. So it's not about oil necessarily when it comes to adaptation, it's about the income levels. So that's one way to look at it. It's also about socio-political stability. There are a lot of countries, fragile states, countries in conflict, that have they have systematically a lower adaptation capacity. Now, in terms of climate risks, I think there's, I like to use the word risk. There's three types that we need to think of when we think of adaptation. Ones are the direct impacts that Tanzid was talking about, things like water scarcity. The indirect ones are often transboundary ones. They come through things like food security. So Middle Eastern countries importing food from countries that are hit by droughts, for example, that risks their food security, or migration, for example. And the third one, which is really important to keep in mind, are transitional climate risks. These are related to the world moving away from oil, which is the mainstay of a large number of the region's economy still today. Now, one more thing one more concept I want to put forth is coined by Anthony Giddens, about the British sociologist, about a decade ago. It's called back of the mind issue. Climate change very easily still is a back of the mind issue. It's been rising on the global agenda, but in this region in particular, because there are so many other short-term issues, either security related, political, or basically just poverty, climate change easily becomes a back of the mind issue, in the poorer countries in particular. And even in oil producing countries, you might be familiar with the concept of rentier state and rentier mentality. It is still very easy to fall to this cycle of thinking, yes, our oil will still be needed for quite some time. So let's not make those risky investments just now. And this is a big challenge. Climate change is very much still a back of the mind issue in this region.
Thank you, Marie. Ruba, do you want to add to this?
Hi, thank you for the invitation. I just want to emphasize what Dr. Mary has been talking about. The climate change is happening and every country will have some kind of impacts, but how we feel that, the degree of how every country or every region feel this impact differs. And this is what is called the vulnerability. The vulnerability is the function of the exposure and the sensitivity. And it has also to do with the adaptive capacity that Dr. Mary was talking about. So if we have high sensitivity, high exposure, and we do have high adaptive capacity, the vulnerability will be tolerated. On the other hand, if we have low capacity with high exposure, we will have exacerbated impact, and we will feel the impacts more and more. So countries in our region, in MENA region, as we mentioned previously, we do have so much challenges. We have human security challenges, poverty. We have the infrastructure is not well managed. We have every kind of, we have also, for example, in Jordan, the dimension of having more refugees. So we are having more populations and more stresses on our natural resources. So this will make our vulnerabilities in the MENA region more and more. And we need to plan well in order to stand in front of those impacts, negative impacts, and to be able to save lives for the future, because it is expected that those impacts of climate change will be intensified, will be more frequent, and will affect every aspect of life, every sector of our economy. So we need to work well together in a collaborative way in order to solve, to produce solutions and to make our vulnerabilities less.
Thank you, Robert. So we now understand that the climate change impacts vary in any given country according to the intensity of the climate change impact, the exposure of the country to it, the preparedness or resilience, I think, which Dr. Marie has associated with income levels, the type of climate change impact. So just to make things a little bit more complicated, what social groupings in countries of the MENA region are more likely to be impacted by that? Does climate change affect genders differently? Does it affect displaced people differently? Does it affect people who live in informal settlements better or worse? And what impact would it have on human security? Does that vary from certain social groupings or not? Can it even lead to displacement? I think that's already been touched on. So I think I would love to hear from all of you on this. You could pick one of those social groupings and discuss it. Those who are interested in the gender type of it, gender component of it, the displacement, the informalities, feel free to pick any of them. I would love to hear from all four of you on the subject. So let's start with whoever wants to go first. Tanzit, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Karim. Just quickly, I think one of the points I wanted to add in terms of the difference of the impacts in the region, and this goes to your question about the vulnerable groups. I've recently just been, it's a bit good bedtime reading, but also for work. I've been reading different countries from the region of West Asia, which includes 12 countries, their NDCs and their national communications on climate change, as well as those that do have them, their national adaptation plans. Now, that paints quite a varied picture. If you look at Yemen, in 2009, they created a NAPA, a National Adaptation Plan of Action, and it's pretty sophisticated. That was 2009, and they had detailed out there some quite good vulnerability assessments for the agriculture sector, for water, with plans and what needs to happen. And the tragedy is, as we all know, what's happened in Yemen with the regional kind of war, is that it sets so much back there. So they're extremely vulnerable to the impacts from from poverty and water, and not to mention kind of the security and kind of issues that they're facing there. So that's the context in which climate change action needs to happen in Yemen. That security and stability needs to happen first, and then otherwise also climate change will exacerbate the impacts that they're already facing. So that's one example. If you look at a country like Syria, you know, even in their first national communication, which again is a pretty good piece of work, you know, I'm sure they got some funding from the UN to do that work, and they've got in there some quantified impacts on the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, and what that means in terms of reduced agricultural productivity. It's almost as if it predicted what would happen in the Arab Spring, and the migration of farmers going out to the rural, from rural to urban areas. So they're very vulnerable, groups of people. If you look also at the wealthier kind of Gulf Arab states, they're at risk in terms of the rising salinity of the Gulf, the waters of the Gulf. So one reason the salinity is increasing is because of increased desalination and the brine that's discharged into the Gulf. But on top of that, climate change and heat basically is causing more evaporation and increasing salinity further. This actually calls into effect how valid desalination will be as a technology. Now, it could be seen as a technology to use for adaptation to climate change and provide more water, but in a scenario where the Arabian Gulf will become more saline, that might not be viable anymore. So that could affect certain populations, even in more of the richer countries like the Gulf states as well. So it's, I just wanted to kind of paint that picture from looking at the impacts and continuing on from the last question. And I won't speak about gender issues. I'm not very well placed or researched on that. I'm sure some of the others would be need to talk about that. Thanks.
Marie, yeah, you've got your hands up. I cannot see all the hands.
Okay. Thanks. I'll make 2 points. One is that, yes, of course, there are groups that are more vulnerable. This applies to the world. We know what the groups are. And the second point relates to causalities and why it is so difficult to get government attention to the need for adaptation planning and adaptation action. So on the first point, I actually dug some statistics. So just a few numbers. The poor are, of course, the most vulnerable. But women generally are poor because 70% of the world's poor are women. So it's pure statistics. And also you have rural communities, people working in agriculture that tend to be more impacted because they're more directly exposed, obviously, to the elements. And in the Middle East, women account 50% of the agricultural workforce. So yes, you have lots of special groups that are potentially vulnerable. Workers, of course, low-income laborers, displaced people, they're more exposed to the elements naturally. But this brings me to the next point. It's very hard to pinpoint the exact contribution of climate change to all this vulnerability in many cases, including displacement. And I think the example of Syria is quite illustrative. There was a huge drought in Syria around 2008 and 2007, which some scholars have then linked to the Syrian uprisings and the Syrian civil war, because there was, in fact, there was a migration from rural areas in the northeast to the cities, which then caused a lot of unemployment, and that some feel is a contributing factor to the instability that has followed, or that was sparked at the time. However, there's also studies that show that, in fact, water had already been mismanaged in Syrian agriculture for a very long time. There had been a fuel subsidy reform, which had impacted agricultural workers, and unemployment was already very high. And so it's very, very hard to tell policymakers that this is now a reason why you need to tackle climate change. It's not. It's very difficult to pinpoint. And there is a term coined by ex-US military officers about 15 years ago, which you may have heard, which describes climate change as a threat multiplier. And so I don't quite like this term because it doesn't multiply the number of threats. It simply intensifies them. So it's a risk intensifier. And this is what climate change does. It makes existing fragilities and risks worse. And again, that's why it's so hard to tell policymakers now you need to focus on climate change, because there's already so much going on.
Aisha?
Can I jump on? Yes, thanks. So yeah, for me, I would add a point on the GCC specifically, because that is my area of expertise. So in the human displacement and for the GCC, since there are ambitions to diversify the economy away from the oil and developing non-oil economic sectors, and as we mentioned, the major climate stresses for the region are the increasing temperature and the low rainfall. And that could possibly, if we think about the economic diversification, we are actually, we need to enable non-oil economic sectors like the agriculture, like the tourism, and not having those non-oil economic sectors striving on one place, but in different areas around the country. But with the climate change, it exacerbates the issues for those non-oil economic sectors, like as I mentioned, like the agriculture and the tourism. And in that case, it raised the risk that for the people who relies on those sectors as their main source of income, there's the possibility for them to move from rural areas to urban areas, and that would create further stress on the cities in the Gulf region. And this is actually already an issue. There is a migration of the people to cities to find jobs, but if we don't address this specific issue, we are actually doing something that is counterproductive to the economic diversification ambitions, where we need to decentralize our investments and not focusing them on one place, but in different areas around the country.
Great, thank you, Aisha. Ruba?
I want just to add that maybe the women are more vulnerable because in our region, for example, in rural areas, they have less adaptive capacity. They have less access to education in some areas. I will not generalize. And they are sometimes forbidden to own their businesses, for example. They don't take money from their father after death. So there are some restrictions that do not enable them, do not empower them. So maybe the solution also comes from empowering women, by the way. The adaptive solutions or the adaptive measures that we need to design should start from women, from households. They can educate their children. They can have the solutions from their own perspective. Also, in terms of mitigation, they can educate their children to maybe use energy more efficient, to save energy. So they are vulnerable group, but the solution is the key to the solution is in our hands as a gender, as women. So I wanted just to point that.
Thank you for pointing out, and I think it's quite important. Moving on, I think I want to shift gear a little bit to our solutions. I think we've got a pretty good idea of how complex the climate change impacts are, climate change risks are, to use Marie's term. So I would like to move into climate solutions or climate actions, at least touch on those in the remaining part of this panel. So overall, we'll discuss two things: climate mitigation and climate adaptation. The amount of carbon reduction that we need to reduce to limit climate change to the desired 1.5 degrees as per the Paris Agreement is roughly equivalent to having a COVID pandemic every 2 years. So that means a pandemic, 2 years later another pandemic, on top of another pandemic, on top of another pandemic, and so on. That's the climate reduction of emissions that is required in order to reach net zero by 2050. So a collective action is required, to say the least. It's quite a major undertaking for us globally, and everyone's contribution is required. But the historic responsibility of some of the developed countries, as well as the UN principle of shared but differentiated responsibility, all complicate matters, as developing countries feel that they are entitled to development as well. So could you speak to a little bit to the balance of climate action in the region between mitigation and adaptation? There are schools that have varying opinions on this. There are those pushing for mitigation, others who want a more nuanced one that has a hybrid approach. You hear a lot about co-benefits, adaptation measures with co-benefits. I was wondering if Tanzit, perhaps if you could speak to this as well as Aisha, and then and if Ruba and Marie want to comment afterwards.
Sure. I mean, well, climate change is described as one of the classic kind of market failures of the world in terms of, but also a tragedy of the commons in many ways of the biggest historical emitters, the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, and so on. They're all the ones who are probably the most responsible and have to take the biggest leadership action, but also there's rising emissions when it comes to, your emerging economies as well. So I won't dive into that more, but I'd say in terms of a balance of that, I'd say mitigation is in everyone's interest. Whenever I'm speaking to kind of policymakers, planners, businesses, it's kind of that commercial case is so clear now when it comes to reducing your emissions, even in this region. It's look at the record low costs of solar power, energy efficiency. These are all kind of low hanging fruit, and the energy efficiency side in particular is a bit of a win-win when it comes to adaptation and mitigation. If you think about having good green building codes, which make your building more, require less energy in a region where temperatures are going to continue rising, and energy demand will keep rising, it's good sense to mitigate through energy efficiency as well as making sure you're well adapted to it. So it just makes sense to go harder and faster on those standards and improving them. It can help improve quality of products on the market and so on. So that side of it, there's a lot of co-benefits, even on cooling, providing ways to cool your buildings, through design, kind of more passive design of buildings, natural cooling, looking at nature-based solutions in an urban environment to provide that. It has been relatively untapped. You'll know this, Karim, you're an architect, right? Your background, you know this better than me. But even in terms of cooling technology, the use of district cooling, for example, in the UAE, there's a lot of infrastructure around district cooling. That doesn't use the HCFC gases that your traditional window cooling systems use. It uses water and electricity. That water could be used from recycled water sources, and it's way more energy efficient. It saves, firstly, the direct emissions from your cooling system, and it reuses less electricity. So that's a bit of a win-win adaptation and mitigation co-benefit. There's so many more of these which are quite untapped. So you kind of start probably with that, I'd say. But I'd say on balance, probably more of the effort has been on mitigation. I think some of the Gulf countries historically didn't want to call it even mitigation. I think they call it economic diversification with mitigation co-benefits, but there's a commercial case for that, and it's getting clearer and clearer. I think some of the harder areas to move will be your high emitting industries, cement, steel, petrochemicals, for example. That requires more of an effort, and that's where things like carbon pricing tools haven't really been tapped here before, but that could help. So I'll stop there. I want to give others space to answer that question as well, but I wanted to give you my perspective on that.
That was wonderful. Thanks, Tanzit. I think you are on the same page, which is great. Aisha? Yes, please.
Yes. So yeah, I will build on what Tanzit has mentioned. I like the point when he mentioned that we need to think about the win-win opportunities. But again, like when we think about the climate action, and particularly in this time, I think there is no time to think who was responsible, who was not, because we need to work together to tackle the climate change, and we need to work together to reduce the rising in the global temperature to well below 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. Because at the end of the day, all countries are going to be affected by the impacts of the climate change in a way or another. So we really need to work in a collective manner to address the climate change. And for the MENA region, again, we are speaking about a heterogeneous region where the climate action will be different from one country to another. But I would reflect a little bit from a T20 policy brief that we have written. So in our T20 policy brief, we've mentioned that there is a reluctance from the countries around the world to act on climate because there's the thinking that the climate action is a costly solution. It affects the economy in a negative manner. So in our policy brief, we call that we need to think about the win-win opportunities when we address the climate change, because there are economic benefits, there are environmental and social benefits from the climate action. And for the MENA countries, if I can give an example, the focus, for example, in developing the renewable and the energy efficiency is going to actually help with addressing the energy security issues. Now, even for the wealthy countries that have abundance of the oil and gas supplies, like some of the GCC countries, some of them are in need to meet the rising of demand through the import of the natural gas, for example. So there is, even the wealthy countries needs to import. So there is the benefit of reducing the dependence on the other countries when it comes to the energy. There are also some environmental benefits. So some of the MENA countries are ranked on the top countries in the world in terms of the concentration of the particulate matter. So also again here we can bring the benefit of improving the air quality through the development of alternative energy technologies. But unfortunately, renewables do not account or do not exceed, I think, 6% of total electricity generation in the region. So the point is to now not to think about who contributed most to the greenhouse gas emissions or less, is to think about how climate action is going to benefit our economy. And there are many cases that shows that the climate action is going to create jobs and it's going to help with the economic growth. Because in the long run, for example, if we don't take action on climate now, in the long run, we will see the impacts and the cost will be higher than the cost that we are seeing today.
Great. Marie, if I may ask you, could you speak to the sub-regional component of this? And Roba as well, if you could speak to perhaps the Levant sub-region component of this. Yes, please. Marie first.
I'm really sorry, Karim. I'm not sure what you mean with the sub-regional component.
So the Gulf component. So the Gulf component, the GCC component.
I'm based in the Gulf, so that's why hence. Okay, so let me speak to that, but do that through reacting to what Aisha said. I very much sign a couple of things she said. One is there's no time. You need to adapt and you need to mitigate. The way not to talk about climate change is to compare it to how many COVID we need. We need to talk about the benefits. I think there's a rhetorical communication thing that is very important. And in this region in particular, in the Gulf also, we have to stress the benefits of climate action. I think it's very simple if we compare mitigation and adaptation. Both are important. And the more you mitigate, the less you need to adapt. But it doesn't work the other way around. So the more you adapt, you still need to mitigate. So adaptation is one part of the solution. And there is, and I've been following international climate negotiations where this reporting team called the Earth Negotiations Bulletin for a good part of the decade, going to most of the COP since 2008. So there is this huge sense of frustration that is very well summarized in this phrase, common but differentiated responsibilities, which goes back to 92, to the Rio Conventions, the Climate Convention, when it was coined back then, says, yes, all countries need to take action, but some countries are more responsible. The developed countries need to lead and need to provide finance. And a lot of these promises have been unmet. So of course, there's a lot of frustration. However, this is also a rhetorical tool. Unfortunately, on both sides, developed and developing, things get used as tools to get what you want in negotiations. And unfortunately, sometimes these calls for adaptation can be used strategically as well. So rhetoric is one thing, but absolutely adaptation is a priority in the region. And I think the key point here is that the same causes, the causes of unmet adaptation needs are the same than of unmet development or sustainable development needs. So we need human development, we need human security in the region. That's the best adaptation policy. In the Gulf, as I've said, now to the sub-regional point, the GCC states overall have a pretty good ability to invest if they want in adaptation. So it's more of a question of making those adaptation plans and a gap, honestly, between rhetoric and action. So yes, adaptation is important, but let's do something about it, I would say.
Thank you. Ruba, could you speak to the Levant a little bit? Yeah.
Maybe I can give the example of Jordan. For our NDC, for our first NDC, we have the adaptation component very much identified and clarified in our document. And currently we are we are developing a roadmap for the long-term low-carbon strategy. And we have agreed with the government that we need to have both mitigation and adaptation as balanced, but with a little bit of, let's say, bias towards adaptation. Because we are a water-scarce country, and most of our problems, let's say, even at the economical level, is caused by having less water, by having so much demand for water, and having less productivity for the agriculture. So we need to do something. We need to do something in terms of adaptation measures in order to have our country developed and our economical needs met. We have also stressed on the fact that we should have a co-benefit aspect and a co-benefit module in our long-term strategy. But we are facing things like for the adaptation, the cost of inaction, how we can calculate this, how can we assess this, how can we make monitoring and evaluation for our actions. So we need to deal with those things in order to empower our actions and to make things clearer for the implementers. As all my colleagues said, we have to work on the mitigation. It's a win situation for all of us. And also, it occurs to me while my colleagues were talking that we need to make the COVID recovery green, and we should, in order to have good climate action, we need to link it with the recovery, because maybe for 5 years from now, we all have to deal with it is the recovery, the economic recovery from the COVID implications. So we need to have the climate action aligned with this recovery in order to make the emissions less and to make our adaptation measures work well.
Great, and I think we will come to the Green Deal component, a MENA Green Deal in a minute. But before that, I think I want to touch on the increasing climate ambitions. I'm sure over the last year, many of us have noticed an increasing commitment around the world, mostly from developed countries, to reach zero carbon by 2050 and to also significantly improve their nationally determined contributions, which is the pledge under the Paris Agreement, the national commitment under the Paris Agreement. And we've seen some of the improvements on that front as well from around the world. In the region, we have seen an increasing commitment from the UAE, I think for the first time, and now has a percentage reduction big compared to business as usual. We've seen an improvement in Lebanon and the NDC. Morocco is also reportedly considering moderate increase in its NDC as well. And Saudi Arabia has just announced an incredible target for carbon emission reduction, but it's not part of the Paris Agreement yet. It's not part of the framework of the NDCs. So in your mind, what do you think is triggering this increasing commitment in the region? Is that just part of a gradual increase in climate ambitions, or is that something more significant? And also another one that I think I will address mostly towards Aisha is, what do you think is the positive? What do you think? Do you think there is a positive development in integration of climate policies into economic plans or energy transition in general, focusing specifically on the Gulf? So I think I'll start with the first one on Tanzid and in general, whether you think there is a trigger that has caused a jump in commitment in the MENA region, or if that's just a gradual increase in your mind.
Sure. I think there's various triggers. I've been following this kind of out of curiosity. There's a lot more action and momentum on climate change in this region this year than I've seen for a long, long time. And that's positive. I think a lot of that has been triggered by the change in the US administration and the appointment of John Kerry as climate envoy. One of the first meetings he had was with Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE special envoy on climate change. I do think there's an interesting sense of the UAE and Saudi becoming competitors maybe in some way on this space, economically as well. You know, with Saudi waking up and actually investing heavily in its achievement of its Vision 2030. There's an interesting sense of competition between them, which I think could actually be to the benefit of climate action. But I think those are some kind of more political triggers, I'd say, and they're not always permanent, you know, and so we can't kind of rely on that. But I think in the case of a country like the UAE, they've actually been working on climate issues for quite some time now. So I'd see and there's increasing integration of issues. So they had a national energy strategy and an emirate level energy, sorry, it was a mosquito, they had an emirate level energy strategy in Dubai. In Abu Dhabi, there's an emirate level energy transition plan. The UAE federally has an energy kind of strategy to 2050, where they've set targets, where they even quantified what their carbon emissions reductions could be. They have plans to change their desalination plants from thermal to reverse osmosis, which already reduces your emissions. Obviously, the nuclear power plant has come online. These are all things that set in place over a decade ago. And it's a natural, I think, evolution of those plans coming together in 2020 to be an upgraded NDC. So I know they did modeling efforts within the ministry for the first time. I think they didn't actually rely on consultants to do it. So it's nice to see some capacity being built within your actual kind of civil service and the Ministry of Climate Change in the UAE in that sense. So that's good. I think with other countries, I think with Saudis, some of these big ambitious kind of goals on renewables to increase it to 50% have a long way to go. They're about 0.3% of their energy mix is renewable right now. So in 9 years, to build gigawatts each year is going to take some doing. I applaud the ambition, but I think we have to see it actually be implemented. Yeah.
Great. Aisha, could you speak to integration of climate policies into economic plans? I know you've written on this, so I look forward to your response to the subject.
Yeah, sure, but I saw Mary also raised her hand, but I can go.
She's pointing to you.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So also I would like to a little bit talk about what triggered the change in the and I will speak specifically on the GCC because that is like where I know more of. So what triggered it, I think also adding to the political aspect factor, there's also, I think there's also an economic aspect of it. So for the GCC, because there has been stress on the energy resources in the GCC, I think the GCC countries started to see the economic advantage of developing the renewable energy and enhancing the energy efficiency programs, as well as doing some of the energy price reforms across the region. And specifically for Saudi Arabia, this has been done most recently, and especially following the drop in the oil prices in 2014, and most recently because also of the pressure that has been brought by the COVID-19. These actually, there was the realization that if we do all of this kind of reforms and developing renewables, then we can, reduce the pressure on the energy resources domestically. So instead of like burning the fuel domestically, especially for the electricity production and the water desalination, it would be good to free more of that fuel for other uses, either for the export, and then we have like more revenues, governmental revenues, or for also meeting the needs of the economic diversification ambitions. So for the GCC, most of the economic diversification has been happening along the value chain of the oil industry, upstream, midstream, and the downstream. And for all of that, you need also oil and gas feedstock. So there is a big opportunity to free more oil and gas for other uses rather than burning it domestically. So this is, I think, one of the triggers for why we are seeing there is an acceleration on climate-related action. In terms of whether the GCC also see an opportunity of integrating climate action and environmental sustainability along the economic development plans and diversification strategies, I would say there is signals of optimism. So if you look at the economic development plans and the visions across the GCC, almost on all the GCC countries, you will see there's an environmental sustainability element or climate-related element. But for me, what I want to say that we need to differentiate between what is in there in the plan and what we do actually on the ground. In terms of what we do on the ground, I would say I will add to what Tanzit has mentioned. There is a lot going on, especially in the most recent 2 years across the GCC. We have seen the rise of the renewable energy development by more than, I think, 400% between 2009 and 2020. And then we see energy efficiency programs and targets across the GCC. In terms of the integration, I can bring the example of the UAE. So the UAE has developed its nationally determined contribution in line of its economic development vision. And it has also put forward a green growth strategy. And with this green growth strategy, it considers both the mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. And it also, the UAE has also submitted an enhanced nationally determined contribution this year, if I'm not mistaken, early this year. And it also aims to align its climate action with its economic development. And then we also see the Saudi Arabia, as Tanzit mentioned, came up with many initiatives, including most recently 2 initiatives, the Saudi Green Initiatives and the Middle East Green Initiative. And it also put forward, or actually after the Climate Leaders Summit that has been hosted recently by the US, the Saudi Arabia also joined a net zero producers forum, which also I think, or I believe, it's going to think about how to reach a net zero target, which fits the context of all producing countries. And also we have seen that Saudi Arabia has came up with the circular carbon economy approach, which aims to maximize the value of the carbon resources, but at the same time aiming to reduce the carbon emissions by the possible ways through reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. And with that comes the development of different technologies, not only renewables, not only energy efficiency, but also a focus on the hydrogen and also on the carbon capture and storage. So I think what is happening, I think in the GCC, there is a political factor. I can see that there's a political will when it comes to the climate action. I don't know, like we will go back to the previous, but my feeling is that we will move forward in terms of the climate action here in the GCC. And I think also what triggered that political will is the thinking about the economic advantage, which is that comes with climate action. I'll stop here.
That is great. Thank you so much, Aisha. I agree with you that ship has sailed. I don't think we'll be going back to 2 years ago. But for balance, I would like to ask Ruba to also provide us with a non-GCC perspective, because I hope Batter would have joined us. The panel is currently, because of Batter's inability to join us, has become a little bit skewed towards the GCC. So I'm sorry to pick on you. Could you talk a little bit about economic policies that relate to climate change, or integration of climate policies in general into economic policies in Jordan, and maybe perhaps in wider Levant?
Actually, we are working with GIZ in order to update our NDC current for this current cycle, and the government is considering raising the ambition, and we are thinking of more than one scenario. We have the most potential reduction within the energy sector, because as you may know, we are a non-oil country. We have maybe like 90% of our, we pay a lot for energy. 90% of our oil resources or energy resources imported from outside Jordan. So we need to make solutions for the energy consumption reduction in order, and it has to do with also, it aligns with the climate action. So our target within the NDC scenario reduction is the energy sector. We are considering introduction of so much renewables, energy efficiency, electrical vehicles, also introduction of more of natural gas, because natural gas, as you may know, is less carbon intense than the fuel oil. So we do have potential for raising our ambition, just targeting the policies working within the energy sector. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's great. No, that's what we wanted. Thank you so much.
We do have new energy strategy 2030, and it targets also raising the share of the renewable energies within the energy mix. We will have more electricity generated from renewables.
Is the renewable energy plan still on track? Because it sometimes feels touch and go in Jordan. Is it still back on?
It has to do with the grid issue, and they are working on solving this. So it is on and off. Hopefully it will be on next phase.
Right, thank you.
I'll make just a few very brief remarks. First, on to Tanzeed's point, I agree that the change in the administration in the US is driving some of these announcements that we've seen from the Gulf region in particular. But there's also another factor in play, which is the fact that the world of investment is getting very serious about climate risks. And oil companies are getting more and more pressure in many regions to commit to these net zero targets, to align their business with a climate safe world. So it's in this light that I think the Net Zero Producers Forum that Aisha mentioned is really interesting. And in this region, as you know, environmental awareness is not strong. I don't want to generalize, but in many Gulf countries, at least, it is not very strong. And you don't have a civil society that would act as a sort of watchdog vis-a-vis governments. And so a lot of climate policy, yes, it's done through sort of for national reasons, for things like you can, if you have renewable energy that saves oil, you can export more oil and so forth. But a lot of it happens in dialogue with international partners. And there, I just want to highlight a few things, because it's very important for this region, and when engaging with this region, the oil producers of the Gulf, to know what language is considered. And this is constantly evolving as well. So one needs to always keep in mind that this region feels that it is very vulnerable to the transitional climate risk, and that it should be recognized for this vulnerability. And when you approach it this way, you can actually see that a lot is happening. These countries, they have been talking about mitigation. They've been talking about co-benefits, economic diversification, and the co-benefits that it can generate to climate change mitigation. So if you grow your solar industries, you can reduce your emissions, but it's good for your economy. That's this region's way of speaking about mitigation. And most recently, we're hearing countries subscribe to this net zero which is also a huge difference. It's a huge change. Things like green growth for a long time were very controversial. Net zero was very controversial. Zero carbon is still very controversial in many countries. And so you need to know the language. And if you engage with the countries with this mindset, you do see that a lot is happening. What we do need now is short-term targets and implementation plans. There's big gaps in those areas still, I think, in this region.
Absolutely, yes. Implementation plans is something that we're yet to see. So while we have you, I would like you to talk a little bit about climate funding. I'm sure you're aware all the NDCs in the region are conditional. At least all the non-Gulf NDCs are conditional on receiving support, and one of the mechanisms, the Global Climate Fund, is only releasing a small fraction of the money, and it's not even meeting its own targets. The funding that is meant to support climate action in many parts of the region. So could you speak a little bit to the role of external funding in countries that are not responsible for historical emissions like the MENA region, and how successful is climate financing generally across the region?
Okay, so let me paint a picture for you. As I said, I've been following the climate negotiations for a very long time, and this comes with a caveat, and I'd like very much to hear from Roba afterwards, because I don't know the Levant or North Africa as well. I know the Gulf a lot better. In the international climate governance fora, Arab countries have not been seeking climate finance really actively. Yes, it's in their plans, but they're generally quite silent when it comes to climate finance negotiations. For many, the Gulf countries in particular, they wouldn't be asking for climate finance. And some of them put this very clearly in their NDCs, in their climate plans. They're aid donors themselves. They donate huge amounts of even climate finance themselves. They do not want to be seen as climate finance donors. That's a red line for many, but bilaterally, they donate a lot of climate finance. So that's one thing. But then you have countries that really do need the finance and are not getting it, but they might also not be seeking it actively. Again, because climate change is a back of the mind issue. There's so many other priorities, so many other challenges, human development challenges, and so forth. And of course, lack of climate finance is a huge bone of contention. Anybody who follows the UN climate negotiations knows this. But at the same time, what is happening in the region is there's a lot of private finance that is flowing, but the challenge is it's more plentiful. It goes more to countries that already have good infrastructure. They can receive the finance. They have the capacity to elaborate project plans to manage these projects. And it generally goes more to mitigation than to adaptation. And this is not just a problem for the MENA region. It's usually the countries that most need finance are not getting it. And I have no solution for this, but we have to keep in mind that this is a very diverse region, and maybe the countries with better means in the region could think about, and some of them could think about how they could support their neighboring countries financially.
Absolutely, and this lack of capacity, sometimes it's institutional capacity, means not having enough staff who can fill forms to apply for the right thing. It can be, so Roba perhaps could expand on that.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that because we are a seeker for finance, for example, as Jordan, but we need capacity building for proposal writing, for writing a project in a good way, for designing the measures well. I guess we need a lot, even if we have sessions for capacity building, we need more. We need, for example, currently we did have a project from the Green Climate Fund, but off the record, we had a consultant help us write the proposal. We didn't do it ourselves. So we do have a gap in the capacities of how we design, how we ask for the fund, how we do state, how we can verify that we will make such a reduction. What is the benefits, what are the co-benefits, how we can make investment, co-finance, all those, the financing mechanism, I mean. So we need to work a lot on those issues in order to receive or to target the funds. Because this is our maybe a project this year, our first project from the Green Climate Fund, and it's just for 33 million. And I guess there are more countries in the region that had took more than that, and there are available finance for our region, and we can target it if we know how to, and we lack this capacity. We need to develop our capacities in terms of writing financed project and what we call it bankable projects with a business model and with clear tracking tools. And that brings me to the tracking. We do still have weakness in the tracking tools because if the donor or the source of finance don't see well-tracked, verified reductions, they will not channel finance to us. So we need to work more on our verification tools, monitoring tools, reporting tools, in order to have better vision for the donors or the funders' money, how it's channeled and how it is, what can I call it, how it is implementing the purpose of it, if it's adding value or not. And there's something also I wanted to mention here. We do have lots of international support, but it is not labeled as climate finance. We have it as development aid for our support, and it happened to be with a climate action or climate reduction byproduct. So it is not well verified what is climate action and what is climate finance, and we need to work more on this aspect as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we have seen many donors now conditioning much of their international aid on including a climate aspect to it. I think France and the EU in general now have strict quotas.
Now currently to adding this, linking it to the NDC.
Great. So for the final question before we take a Q&A, so let's keep that one quick. It's about the role of cities, regions, and the civil society in general. Obviously, the climate's all about countries. They are the signatories to the UNFCCC. So and most people, when they discuss climate work, the climate action, they discuss political will or lack thereof. So there are other players here. There are the cities and regions, we've got the private sector, and we've got civil society. What role do you think they have in this? And if you could keep it as brief as possible, and any of you could jump into this, and then we'll take some Q&A questions.
Sure, I'm happy to start, kick it off if that's okay. I think they have a massive role. So I think, and that's a really positive space for engagement right now. In the region, Amman previously joined the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, but that stopped now. But it created a resilience plan, which triggered the development of the Amman Climate Plan 2050. And there's some really interesting things happening in the city. I'm sure Ruba will be able to explain better than me. So that's one example. And they're also part of the C40 city group, which Dubai is a part of as well. So Dubai, when it joined the C40 climate group, it developed its, and these are kind of usually initiatives that can trigger and catalyze action within that city. So Dubai developed its carbon mitigation strategy and set a target to reduce its emissions. I don't know the exact number, by a certain amount by 2020, compared to its business as usual emissions. And then it also developed its own Dubai climate change adaptation strategy, which I was involved in helping them to develop, doing vulnerability assessments and so on. So I think that's kind of a rich source of kind of work that could be a nice way to connect the region and the cities. There's more and more people living in urban environments here. It's highly urbanized in a lot of the countries. So, and they're not always properly ready to deal with the impacts of climate change. So I think there's some interesting work there to be done to encourage municipal level authorities and building capacity there on the topic. Even with businesses, there's more and more interest in the topic as well. We're seeing businesses setting targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, to source more renewable energy in their operations. It's happening in Jordan, it's happening in Saudi, it's happening in the UAE. even Etihad Airways, the national the airline for Abu Dhabi has set, I just found out the other day, a net zero goal by 2050. I'm sure that will involve a lot of offsets, but it'll be interesting to see what that means in terms of the green hydrogen development that's happening in Abu Dhabi at the moment with the alliance with Mubadala, ADNOC, and Mazda, and the creation of green hydrogen. And hydrogen could be a source of fuel for aviation. So there's some interesting work there around how businesses could actually drive really positive change in the region. And even in civil society, there's a lot. I mean, I used to work for WWF for about almost 10 years, working in the UAE. It's a challenging environment to work in civil society. You don't have freedoms that your civil society in the in Europe and North America could experience. But still, even in that, there's a lot of work that you can do to raise awareness, to be a partner of the government, almost work as kind of pseudo consultants for them, but you're committed more to the country than a consultant might be. So there's a lot of work that civil society organizations can do at a grassroots level, but also at a policy level. So I'll stop there.
We need to activate those plans, by the way. Sorry if I marched. Dr. Tanzid, we have all those
plans in Amman, yeah?
Yeah, but we need to do something about them. We need to implement them. They are very, very, very nice documents, but we need still work on how to implement them and how to reap the fruit out of them.
It actually leads to my point, which I was going to make about non-state actors, as they're called in the UNFCCC, or non-party stakeholders. I think they're absolutely critical drivers of action, as Tanzid was saying. But the challenge is that it's very easy for a company to put out a net zero target. It is not going to be held accountable like governments are within the UNFCCC for whether it meets the target or not. There are no transparency arrangements, no kind of tracking of whether businesses and cities, the nice headlines that they get, whether those actually get implemented. And there's an interesting discussion brewing in the UNFCCC and the climate governance fora about, is there a way to actually put in place mechanisms to make sure that you track how these different initiatives, these coalitions are tracking towards their targets, and also to make sure that these, what they claim as their achievements, don't get double counted by the national government. So this is a huge issue.
I agree. I think the MRV aspect is so important. You know, I think targets get set and announcements are sometimes just made only in the media. It's hard to find that detail. But who's actually saying, yes, we set this target of whatever it is, you know, 50% energy or from renewable sources, and this is how far away we are from it, or this is how close we are to achieving it. That's really needed, and that transparency and ability to also acknowledge failure in some cases is so important, to learn from mistakes and say, okay, well, we had a good target, we didn't quite get there, these are the reasons why, we recognize these are the problems, and this is what we're going to do about it to address it. That kind of, I haven't seen that in the culture, to be honest. I mean, I'm not from the region, but I've seen that kind of, that fear of failure, it drives a lot of lack of transparency here.
Great, thank you, Tanzid. So I think we've got time for a couple of questions. There's two questions that I think that we have not been covered yet, and are still relevant to this session. One is about water scarcity and what solutions are there, given, I think I would read this as given the impacts of climate change, so water scarcity getting worse, what possible solutions are there for this in the MENA region? And the other question is about the use of nuclear energy, or the role of nuclear energy, even potentially as a transition fuel towards full renewables. So, so who wants to talk about water scarcity other than Ruba? I think other solutions about water scarcity, Ruba?
It's just that we have to conserve our freshwater resources for the uses it should be used for, and provide for example, the agriculture for the untraditional or unconventional sources. And also in case of the agriculture, we use the crops that use the less water, for example. We should also work on our infrastructure to minimize our losses from the network, of the water network. We can also, what can else? We need to, we have seasons that is good with good water rainfall, with good rainfall. Seems I am tired. with good rainfall, so we need to harvest those water amounts and make use of it for the agriculture. Those are the techniques that we use currently.
So water conservation, water management. Any other points anyone else wants to come in, or about this, or about nuclear?
I can say very briefly, I think the best way to avoid water scarcity is to cut emissions as soon as possible, because that's going to avoid us, the impacts, they're only going to get worse here. There's locked-in warming, but I mean, let's aim to 1.5 all around the world. And on nuclear energy, it's already happening in some countries of the region, whether we want it or not. And there was a huge boom about a decade ago where many technology providers were selling it to the region. I think that has passed. I think now solar is so cheap that I think we're going to see a lot more solar, and hydrogen is kind of the next big thing that we have big question marks around. But I don't think we're going to see a lot on the nuclear front anymore.
Yeah, if I could have one final point to that, Kareem, is on water, is there's a lot of interesting aspects around kind of circular economy principles that can be applied to water. One is, how you produce, conserving your efficiency of water is important, but then also wastewater treatment in the region. I've seen it's even in countries like UAE and Saudi, where there's high levels of wastewater being treated and recycled, it's not always used. Some of it just gets dumped back into the sea, and that can create problems in the marine environment, increased nutrient load and algal blooms and so on, and problems like that. But if that water sometimes could be really high quality water that could be reused in urban landscaping as an adaptation plan as well, to help cool the cities down, green spaces and, green roofs, for example, and having smart buildings that actually absorb the water, and you have it in ponds and reservoirs and you recirculate it back into the urban environment. I haven't seen many of those sorts of things happening or even talked about, but wouldn't that be a nice university project? You have climate smart urban design for the region, and maybe you could be a lecturer in that agreement and help create.
Not at the urban scale, but there's plenty of reuse of existing wastewater in the Gulf, Kuwait, Qatar.
There is, but a lot of it's dumped back in the sea, and that's the problem, And it could be used in agriculture as well. There's a cultural issue there, I understand. But, I think
Jordan treats about 98% of what it captures and uses about 3/4 of it. So that's a good example for you there.
Agriculture. We do have pilot projects for the building water harvesting, rain harvesting, but we need to upscale it and maybe make more building using it.
Great, and I'm aware of the time. I think we're 2 minutes over. I think Natasha would tell us if we have more time to discuss any more of the questions, or have we officially run out of time?
We can answer a few more if the panelists, of course, have some time to stay on for maybe a few more minutes. Is that okay with all of you?
Sure. There's a question about climate denials and those who think climate change. Well, they're not quite climate denials, but they think in the MENA region or in the world in general, climate change is not a top priority. What do you say to those in 30 seconds?
I would, if I quickly just say on that, I'd ask them the question, do you like breathing clean air? Do you like being in nature and having good mental well-being? Do you want to have good jobs for your children and now in a sector that's growing, that has huge opportunities for development in your region? Well, anything to do with climate action can deliver those sorts of benefits for you. So I'd say I'm not dismissing that because it's not a priority, because I think in the light of the pandemic, it probably is being pushed down the pecking order. But I'd say there's some aspects around the language of using the aspect, green growth, job creation, good health and well-being is so important. Thank you.
I mean, I think that really is a challenge if somebody is fundamentally in denial of climate change and thinks it's a matter of believing rather than matter of science. It's really hard to engage. A lot has been written about the psychology of climate communications. It's not, there's no answer, there's no easy answer to that. But I think you have to listen to people's concerns. And it's very difficult in countries where the physical impacts of climate change are not visible yet. We live in a bit of a bubble here in the Gulf. Some have described it as a Mars economy. So everything we have comes from fossil fuels, and we have our water, we have our AC, and we don't really, it's 45 or 50 degrees outside, we don't care. We have AC. Why would we care? Back of the mind. So it is difficult. But I'd say listen to each other and have a frank conversation about what people feel is important, and then perhaps bring up some of the benefits, like Tanzit was saying. Like Joe Biden is now saying climate change is about jobs, which is a nice way to put it.
Aisha, do you want to comment on this? I haven't heard you for a while. So.
Yeah, sure. I joined Mary's voice. I think also we need to think about the subject at the government level and then also at the citizens level. At the government level, maybe at least in the GCC, as we have mentioned earlier, there have been progress in terms of the political will and when it comes to addressing the climate change issues. And we have seen a lot of initiatives most recently across the GCC when it comes to the climate change. But also we need to think that the government itself is not a heterogeneous group. I mean, it is not, there's not a same mindset within the government itself. There are different people with different mindsets, but who influence the decision making, it is something that's really important to think about. When it comes to the citizens, and especially for the Gulf, Mary mentioned a little bit about the awareness of the citizens. And I have looked at a few studies that looks at the citizens' awareness about the climate change in the GCC. Actually, there aren't many studies out there. The most recent study that I have seen is done by the YouGov company, which shows to what extent the people in the GCC and across the world are concerned about the climate change. But for the GCC, a major highlight of this study is that the people, although they think that they would be affected by the climate change and the climate change constitutes a threat for them, but at the same time, people think that it is someone else's problem. So we do have this kind of mindset that we need to work on. And other than that, I have seen the Boston Consulting Group, who also issued a study and made a survey on the consumer awareness of climate-related issues. That study has been published in 2020, and it shows that there is a progress in terms of the people awareness of the climate change. But again, since there is a gap in this area, actually, I have contributed in writing a grant for research to study the awareness of the people in the GCC when it comes to the climate change, and hopefully that will be accepted so that we can work on the study. But again, the point is that we need everyone when it comes to the climate, and especially for the GCC, the consumers play a significant role because they are the ones who consume the water, they are the ones who consume the electricity, they are the ones who brings the demand for the energy and the water resources high or down. And again, they are the ones who are affected also by the solutions, for example, the energy price reforms. So their role and their awareness on why they should be involved is really important. And this is perhaps, as Mary mentioned, they would think maybe it is someone else's problem. Maybe it is the government who should find a solution to it. But I think we need to shift the thinking on the way that how I can benefit from this specific solution.
Thank you, Aisha. I think a few months ago, there was a study by Oxford University and UNDP that suggested that, well, it was carried out by mobile phone survey, just to explain how it was done. And they asked people about the perception of climate change and whether it was an emergency. And they did that in 6 or 7, a handful of Arab countries, and they averaged them. And the results were 2/3 of the population surveyed using mobile phone suggested that this was indeed an emergency. And of those with a university degree, the number goes up to 3/4. So those the deniers are still in the minority, and I think they should come on board. So with that, I would like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank Dr. Marie, Tanzid, Ruba, and Dr. Aisha for the contributions today, for joining us and sharing their knowledge with everyone who's participated. I've learned a lot from you today, and I'd like to thank you for your time and for also to Natasha for inviting all of us to this event today. So thank you, and I look forward to the next panels.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You.
Just to quickly say, it has been an honor to have you all here. We have Hajar Khalmichi. She is going to be our next panelist moderator. So I'm incredibly excited to be introducing her. And again, I thank you all for joining. Feel free to stay for the next panel. So Hajar is a climate, environment, and sustainability expert. We've only met online, but I'm excited to have her here today. She has 13 years of experience in water operations and CSR management. And she actually is the president and co-founder of the Mediterranean Youth Climate Network, which hopefully she will talk to us about it today. She is going to be leading the next panel with Dr. Nuha, who is here as well, Ms. Safa Al-Jayusi, and finally with Mr. Ahmed Badr. So without further ado, Hajar, could you please begin our next panel?
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you all. Welcome, everyone. I would like to first thank the speakers and moderator of in the first panel. We would like to continue the conversation that they were having as well. I'm very pleased to be the moderator of today's panel. And as we all mainly watched and heard, the first panel presented you the problems facing MENA due to climate change. Our panel will be introducing solutions to these problems through technology, urban resilience and governance, and finally through civic participation. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like to agree with you about the way we are going to organize this discussion. I think that rather than having every speaker present their full remarks, we could have 3 rounds of questions, each one reacting to a given question for 5 minutes. Is it okay for you? Yes. So thank you. We have with us today Dr. Nuha Tinay. She is a senior urban development specialist with a background in architecture, receiving her PhD award in urban resilience from London South Bank University and a master from University of Westminster in international planning and sustainable development. Nuha worked for the World Bank Group, MENA, on urban disaster risk management, resilience, and land global practice, and held the position as the Director of Urban Planning and Sustainable Development at the Arab Urban Development Institute. Welcome, Nuha. We have also Safa Al-Jayusi. She is an international award-winning advocate and leading regional campaigns, advisor with more than 10 years experience in the civil society field. She has engaged in climate change negotiations since 2008 as an official climate change negotiations observer under the UNFCCC and became a reference for Arab World Climate Policy to a number of international networks and organizations working to promote governments and individual actions to limit climate change. She played a major role in COP21 in Paris by heading an Arab civil society delegation through running an advocacy and media campaign to successfully have the Arab League sign the agreement. Happy to meet you again here, Safa. Safa is a figure in the Arab climate action. I just remember my first time meeting her in 2016 and at the Met COP Clima, then and COP23 and so on. So happy to meet you again. We have also Mr. Badr, Ahmed Badr. He is the acting director of the International Renewable Energy Agency's ARENA from the Project Facilitation and Support Division. Is a new division that offers member countries dedicated project implementation support. Mr. Badr took up the position in April 2020 and brings more than 30 years of international experience in the field of banking and finance. Prior to joining ARENA, Mr. Badr held several senior operational positions in the field of climate change, renewable energy, energy efficiency, water and infrastructure projects in organizations like the World Bank Group and EBRD, European Commission, and Japan Bank for International Cooperation. So thank you all for being in here. To open the discussion, in your opinions, what is the most essential immediate solutions for climate change mitigation that the MENA region must follow or implement? Please feel free to take the floor. Mr. Badr, yes, as your mic is on.
Thank you very much. Actually, from a gentlemanly point of view, I always like to leave the floor for ladies to start, but if you'd like me to start with their permission, I'm ready to start. Well, coming from the banking sector, I would like to tell you that the most needed policy is already implemented and piloted in the most of the countries that mentioned by the earlier panel members. I would like to mention here specifically Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia as several models, given the fact, as also mentioned earlier, that the region is heterogenic with regard to the energy situation and climate impact on all of these countries. So for me, the piloted policy that needs to be implemented and further expanded is around involving and crowding in non-state actors and civil societies, or what you call it, civic organizations, into the reaching the access to clean energy to the people. To do that, you have to crowd in local banks. Local banks, if you look at the country like Jordan, you will find that the problem is not in the access to money. There is a lot of money. People know how to access the money, but the policies that needs to be enforced further is exactly how can they use this money in good bankable project. I noticed one of the interventions by the earlier panel talking about bankability. And I think this terminology needs to be further enforced in this panel discussion. Bankability here is the word that needs several policies around it. And it has to be fit for purpose at city level, at local condition level. And there are several examples that I will come through it when I will come to this subsequent question. But what I would like to stress here as a generic question before going into deep discussion is mainly about how do we enforce further policies into getting more access to climate finance. And by the way, further on the previous panel, also the word of climate finance does not mean to have a specific dedicated money under, for example, water or energy. It's across the board, starting from adaptation to mitigation, like the word of like the word of bankability. So there is a lot of money there. The problem is that all financiers and investors, starting from very large scale to small scale, is basically about how can they find bankable projects? How can they, when they put their money, they will get the return on investment. They will not waste money on astray, or basically what we say it in banking language, they will reach what we call it NPL, non-performing loans. This is at the end of the story. But money is there, and policies that needs to be further enforced and further deployed, as we discussed in the discussion, as we go to discussion, is about these two main problems. I will stop here, leaving the floor to my colleagues at the panel, and the floor is yours, Ms. Hajar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bader. Well, Nuha, Dr. Nuha, would you jump on this?
Thank you, Hajar. Thanks a lot. And first, I would like to start with saying thank you also to Natasha for welcoming us and being part of the panel today. And responding to your question, Hajar, in terms of, I would say, the most essential or maybe the immediate pressing issue for climate change mitigation and adaptation policies that needs to be adopted in the region. I think my response will focus more on the current status that we have with the COVID-19 and how policies that have we've seen actually integration that is taking place in terms of employability and stimulus packages that governments have taken. But I believe that socioeconomic resilience policies and approaches needs to be prioritized. And this is something that we've seen now very strongly with the impact of COVID-19 on employability, on issues around social protection. So looking into what type of policies that needs to be integrated into our climate change adaptation and mitigation targets is something that needs to be, I would think, socioeconomic resilience needs to be prioritized. And this can come with different ways. So, for example, improving social protection systems, creating and maybe maintaining household registries that are considering not only the normal ways of payments that we've seen in the last years, but more innovative ways of social protection systems. Another thing that governments also in the MENA region needs to be considering when it comes into climate change mitigation and in response to the COVID-19 recovery and maybe response programs is aligning actually what we call the long-term growth objectives for climate change with investments in more holistic approach that's taking into account societal benefits and taking into account the uncertainties that we have seen not in the economic benefits. Issues around employability as well, as I mentioned earlier. So economic stimulus packages can also be improved. So countries have put a lot of efforts into that. But improvement can consider not only the short-term needs for jobs or economic activities, but also actions that needs to be happening in order to boost resilience, sustainability of future economic and employability development paths. Not forgetting definitely health system and educational system, but I think a holistic socioeconomic resilience framework to be adopted by governments is certainly a priority.
Thank you so much, Noha. What about you, Safar?
So for me, first, thank you all for inviting me and to this, and for all the great coordination from Natasha and Hajar. Nice to meet you again. For me, I second what my colleagues said, Ahmed and Noha, but I also like to stress more on the we need to stop digging in the ground, and we need to further invest in renewable energy. In our region, we have the potential. And also I want to stress on decentralized and climate justice issues, decentralized energy resources and the climate justice issues. Because if we kept talking about the climate change in a total silo, it won't work, especially with decision makers. And we need, as non-state holders, non-state holders, and other stakeholders to stop using the same language all the time. And we need to adapt to whatever is happening on the ground. And we need to speak the language of political stakeholders and the people. And COVID-19 showed us that with political will, a lot can be done. And this is what I'm thinking of right now, is that focusing on climate justice, climate change solution is a cross-cutting issues. those cross-cutting issues are, it's cross-cutting through economic, through health, through, through of course, loss and damage, and through multiple other thematic areas and sectors. So talking about climate change alone, I think we need to change a little bit of our communication as civil society, research institutes, and researchers to be more closer to the people and to the public. And I think this is very urgent because the climate change was not a priority. And now with the global pandemic, the political situation and the economic situation is not even there on the agenda.
Thank you. So you're mostly agreeing about taking this opportunity of the new COVID-19 and the new stimulus packages to reframe the policies, either enabling more climate access to more climate finance through national banks, also work on improving the outreach with policymakers and civil society and also researchers and all community and stakeholders to achieve these solutions or to start making an important milestone on climate change within the region. If you want to keep talking about policy, Mr. Ahmed Badr, you are a specialist known for contributing to solid policies and strategies for renewable energy. Would you tell us about the different local and regional policies enabling the development of the mitigation projects in the MENA region?
Thank you very much, Hajar, for your question. And also, just before I forget, I have to also to mention Natasha for organizing this important event. As I wrote to her earlier, that I really very much enjoying between this group. Actually, I'm part of the UN FCCC board and also with the what we call it high-level dialogue with the United Nations. Believe me, I feel you are more, how should I say, you are in an equal foot basis of what the discussion at the very high level among political leaders. And I'm so much enjoying the discussion. Back to your question, I would like to put 3 important examples from developed and developing economy about what are the local policies and regional policies should be there. I will talk here about the example of what we call it New York Green Bank from developed economy and what we call it Principal Bank for Development and Agriculture in Egypt. It's from developing economies. And we'll reflect that in what kind of policies needs to be there. In these 2 banks, what happened is that those 2, I would call it 2 local banks, what at the level of the state of New York, and what at the governorates, or what we call it the states level. The word governorate in Egypt, similar to provinces or states in the United States, whatever you call it, even in Europe, whatever it is. That there is a local funding that's accumulated from the depositor in order to be dedicated for local development and local investment, but needs to have a set of rules that matching with the overall federal rules, policies and rules in order to invest that, what we call it, that will make return on investment, not only financial return on investment, but also socioeconomic investment by creating more jobs, by making the well-being much better for the people. And that's exactly the case. But the difference is basically in the level of the challenges. If you look at the magnitude of these 2 banks in terms of policies set, that you will find in New York Green Bank, that's recently established under Governor Cuomo of New York, is established by mobilizing $1 billion of investment, mainly for renewable energy. But if you look for the Principal Bank for agriculture and development in Egypt, it looks at, we're talking here about something like 500 million Egyptian pounds, something around less than $200 million. The idea here is that both they are setting policies that fit with the socioeconomic local conditions and what we call it demographic conditions in order to invest in clean energy and in sustainable development. For example, and for sure on top of both of them is climate change impact, not only at mitigation, but more thoroughly on adaptation level. Agriculture and water is on adaptation level. What policy specifically is mainly for creating what we call it credit pipeline of access to fund in order to allow people to enjoy benefiting projects, liquidity of money, to create more jobs while mitigating the climate change impact, whether adaptation or mitigation. The policies here actually has to be enforced. What needs to be enforced needs to include the full involvement and empowerment of civil societies that is really needs to be further improved and further invested on by capacity building, but also hands-on available financing tools, meaning not to provide training for training, but to create an access to funding and to provide all needed assistance in order to have these projects works at medium scale, at small scale, at micro scale. But this is exactly what happened and implemented and invested very well in Jordan, also in Tunisia, and also in Egypt. But in different, what we call it, different level of due diligence criteria, which is not fit with industrial economy or developed economy like United States. To give a little flavor and to also to match the 5 minutes, I can tell you that there will be no small scale project in the state of New York at the state level within this bank, but there will be medium to larger scale projects that also creates a lot of jobs. And the due diligence is almost 100% similar to any local bank or any MDBs or multilateral development banks to finance. But if you look for a country like Egypt, like developed economy, or Jordan, okay, when you go to outside of Amman, like an area like Ma'an, for example, or whatever, I don't know who the Baniel from Jordan or from the living area that knows very well Ma'an area, that you will find there is a lot of jobs that could create and put an impact on climate change, mitigation or adaptation, but in the same time, looking for different criteria for due diligence. Like, for example, like some investors at micro scale, they don't have what we call it the asset-backed loans or guarantee to provide the guarantee for any loan they will take. But they are quite known as a family within the local community. They still, within their credibility as a family, could be provided with the needed amount of money based on or the reputation and the integrity of the family. This is exactly what we call it at state level, what we call it sovereign guarantee by the governments, as a state of governments. That's exactly the case. Does it work? It works. Does it provide help? Yes. Does it create jobs? Yes, it did. But what needed to be further scale to provide more policy and enforcement for the civil state actors? I will provide more details, I'm aware of the 5 minutes, but in the same time does not fit with the developed economies. I think the good model that we need to look at and to compare with is what's happening in Bangladesh or in India and some local banks in order to further replicate, but given the demographic and the cultural dimension within our MENA countries. I will stop here, and I believe that there will be further on the discussion, but handing over to you, Ms. Hajar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for highlighting the role of different development banks and in green financing, also giving those examples on different countries out of the region and within the region. I think the points of the government sovereignty is very important, but also it should give more than it should dig deeper than that to have successful projects. Nuha, can you define urban resilience as it pertains to the MENA region? How are governments and international organizations implementing urban resilience? Are there any similarities between urban resilience policy frameworks and climate mitigation policy frameworks?
Okay, so thank you, Hajar, for the very interesting question. If we are coming to define urban resilience, so there is no, I would say, one definition for resilience, and that varies depending on the different perspectives of the actors who are actually applying resilience on the ground, or the policymakers who are defining what resilience is, how it can be measured, what indicators are to be used, and what actually are we aiming to achieve? Are we looking into it from an economic perspective or environmental, a social one, or maybe a combination of all? So if we look into the standardized definition of urban resilience by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, It states that it's the ability of a community or a society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner. This definition is very interesting because what it does in the first place is differentiation between communities and societies. And this is something that is very, very important when it comes into understanding what resilience is. Because resilience, or maybe I would say a core part of implementing resilience is actually the ties that we have between the different members, whether within a community and a society. And there is that what we call the transitional point between a community and a society, because if we look into the actual, I would say, terminology of communityness itself, communities do not exist in isolation. So the ties between the people, between the different components of the system, is actually what strengthens its capacity in response to different hazards or stresses. Now, coming into that point of hazard and stress is another thing that I think is very important to be indicated, because what this definition does, it doesn't really actually differentiate between them. And here, if we don't really actually have a very clear understanding of the impact of a stress in comparison, or if we are speaking about shocks, not only stresses, then it's difficult to be able to identify what other responses are going to be taking place. So for governments within the region, whether we are speaking about international organization or we are speaking about civil societies, the private sector, or even people on the ground, there are very important and two key questions that we need to ask. The first question is resilience of what? So what actually are we developing our policies or actions against? Are we speaking about short-term shocks? We are speaking about a short time frame. Is it a disease outbreak? Is it a COVID-19 maybe? Or is it a landslide? Is it flooding? Or is it maybe drought? So we are speaking about a slow onset disaster. So what type of actually, whether it's a natural hazard or a man-made hazard that we are responding to, that's the first thing that we need to be asking. The second question that we also need to ask is resilience to what? So what is actually, are we responding to? Apologies. But resilience of what is actually, what part of the system are we speaking about? Is it the organizations themselves? Is it the communities that are responding? Is it the financial system that we are looking at? Is it the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, and how that is being set? Is it the built environment? So dividing this into components is very important to break down this big terminology and being able to respond to it in the right, and I would say the timely manner that is being addressed in that definition. Another very interesting point, maybe I want to add into my response here, Hajar, if the time might allow me, is actually if we look across the region, and that's one of the key, I would say, findings that I had from my PhD study last year, is actually within the region itself, we define resilience differently. So if we look into how the terminology of resilience is being translated into Arabic, you would find in some parts of the region that we consider resilience in the word of MENA, which stands for, or maybe comes more from the concept of prevention. But in other parts of the region, you will find that resilience is being translated into Muruna, which is something that is more linked into flexibility and how flexible the system is and how adaptable the system is into the new changes that are taking place after a disaster or a specific stress or a shock that's taking place. Another terminology that we also consider is Samud, which is resistance, which again comes with a completely different package of capacities that are required, whether at the institutional level or at the society level. So I believe that as long as we have this diversification of terminologies, which is a healthy thing, it's not a problem, but we need to agree into as a more of, I would say, a standard of what components we consider in understanding resilience in order to be able to develop more of cohesive policies and be able to respond into the different hazards, shocks, and stresses in a more of a cohesive approach.
Well, thank you so much. It's very interesting, and you highlighted very important issue that we are facing during our work in climate action in the region. Is it the difference while we are talking about resilience and how to address it, and the difference between the countries is very interesting. Thank you for highlighting it. Could you, as you have been working a lot on the Arab region, and also you worked on the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster and risk reduction in the region. Could you talk to us a little more about, please?
Sure. Yeah, so speaking about Sendai, actually my passion about Sendai has started a long time ago, I would say in 2015, when I've attended the third Disaster Risk Reduction World Conference in Sendai in Japan, and that was actually the launching of the Sendai framework. And at that time, I was part of the group who were facilitating and organizing a women entrepreneurship resilience startup competition, and that was in collaboration with the World Bank, the Center of Mediterranean Integration. So from that time, and at that time actually we used to also work as part of the Arab Urban Development Institute and holding the position of the Director of Urban Planning and Sustainable Development. Being involved in that moment of the launching of the framework and the negotiations and what the commitments of the countries at the national level are, and from my role at that organization or the NGO, so the Arab Urban Development Institute, just to give you a very quick background, it's a regional NGO that works across the 22 Arab countries, and it has the membership of over 500 cities across the region. So we used to work directly with city mayors. These are the members of the Board of Trustees. And the voice of the local governments was very, very strong at that time of what do actually the national commitments are. What does it mean for local governments to achieve those global targets, and how are they going to achieve them? So from that point of view, I've started to engage more closely with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction on the implementation of the Sendai framework at the local level. And at that time, I believe we had this development of what we call the 10 essentials, which are 10 key components. It's a tool, we call it the Disaster Resilience Scorecard tool, that enable governments to assess resilience at the local level, responding to certain indicators and being able to measure exactly where do they sit in terms of those standardized components. So from that experience and working with around 25 Arab cities in supporting them with their urban resilience assessments, but also helping them in developing their action plans. So how do we actually translate numbers and figures into actions on the ground? What type of finances that are required? What type of capacities that are to be taken into place? And not forgetting, and this is something that have been brought up in the first panel, the diversity of the region. So our region is very, I would say unique in compared to other parts of the world. You have the GCC, you have the Mashriq, the Maghreb, and we have very, very interesting, I would say, characteristics for each part. But also what we need not to forget is we have also some countries that are in a very fragile situations with conflict, displacement, urban violence taking place and actually escalating from one year to the other. So when we respond to the needs of the different countries and the different cities, we should always consider the different levels of capacities, but also different level of vulnerabilities. And with those assessments across the 25 Arab cities, it was very unique and very interesting that we get to see that the component of society resilience have ranked the lowest across all cities, whether from the GCC or other parts in the region. And that means that we have to put a lot of effort into understanding what resilience means at the societal level. How are we going actually to really carry on and bring up the voices of the most vulnerable and the people in need into those assessments? We have to be very honest and very frank. When we do all of these, I would say, focus group discussions and meetings, we usually have representatives from local governments, a civil society organization if we are very lucky, and representatives from the private sector, but at a very, very low level, the voices of the people who are the most in need are not really heard. So I believe from my experience, this is something that we really need to keep in mind, carry along, and specifically now that we are speaking about climate change adaptation and mitigation, resilience is actually a tool to apply all of these global targets that we are talking about. and it's now the right time to really carry along those voices and make sure that they are very well heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Noha. Thank you. It is quite really interesting how how the Arab world is facing resilience issues, and specifically when implementing the Sendai framework for disaster and reduction. You mentioned that the 25 Arab countries have been subjected to the program and also how you find out that the societal part was one of the most important vulnerabilities of the region that needs to be tackled. So when speaking about urban resilience, we're going to speak also about social resilience, which is an integrated part of the urban resilience on its all. Thank you, Nohab. As we are speaking on, about the societal part, I would like to go to Safa. And Safa, you are really involved in, and you know that civil society worldwide is mobilized more than ever for climate action at different scales. How is advocacy at the high level spheres in the political lobbying circles working in the region for more efficient and ambitious climate policies?
Thank you, Hajar, for this question. So maybe thinking about it vice versa. Imagine that civil society and activists are not in the political sphere at all, or in climate change negotiations, nor media or social media or research institute. And only political stakeholder and government are negotiating on behalf our generation, the next generation, and the future. They will only think of today, and they will only think of their direct twins, and of course, their political benefit and the benefit of fossil fuel lobby. So this is like when you see how it's important, imagine them alone speaking on behalf of all of us. And yeah, and it's scary actually thinking about it. So it's really crucial having civil society in the political lobbying circles, because we are there to remind people that we are watching you and we are working with you and supporting you if you want to support others, especially when you look at the ages of the political decision makers, especially in our region. They won't be there to witness the climate change, so they are looking only for today. And that's why also the youth civil society and the youth activists are really important to remind everyone that they are the ones who are dealing with the climate change consequences that we caused it today. So I have two great examples that I wanted to share, like from a real life examples, and I think this is the best way to show how important sometimes the civil society. So I have been very proud and honored to found two networks that are still in and very active in the region. It took a lot of sleepless nights, but it was worth it. One of them is the Arab Youth Climate Change Movement, which is now a huge, tremendous movement in the region. We created it in the COP in Qatar in 2012, and those youth were the voice of everyone. Like they were like the champions, and they were talking with political stakeholders and with everyone. We actually gave them the tools and trained them to do that, and it turned to be amazing. And they did push everyone to speak about climate change nationally, regionally, and internationally. Another one, which Hajar, you are familiar with, is the Can Arab World, in which I founded in 2015, and now it's also up and running. I invited maybe 15 NGOs, and I'm not sure how many NGOs it has now. I'm sure it's about
150 now.
Okay, perfect. I'm really proud of that. We worked with them toward Paris. We gave those NGOs the tools. And when I talk about climate change NGOs and how they collectively influence the regional position for climate change, we are not only talking about climate change civil society actors. When you talk about the climate change, you are talking about the human rights civil society actors, you are talking about gender and women rights, because the climate change is a cross-cutting issue. And in COP21, actually, one of the main blocking stones were in the front of Paris Agreement were, unfortunately, the Arab group. And we did a huge campaign on the ground and we did this huge ad in the Financial Times and everything, beside lobbying with Tunisia, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Qatar, and everyone to have the group sign the agreement. So I think in general, having civil society is important, and civil society in the Arab region is important, although we are not in the best shape as other countries internationally, but we are there, and we are definitely advocating in the political sphere.
Thank you, Safa. I'm very happy that you bring out the AYC and the Arab Youth Climate Movement and the Arab World. Actually, the Arab Youth Climate Movement is a founding member of the Mediterranean Youth Climate Network. Yes, yes, alongside with the Italian Climate Network, Climate International, and other organizations. And if I may say a note on this, as you bring also the youth engagement, yes, your other voices and contributions of the youth are crucial for the effective implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, as recognized in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, which reaffirms the international intergenerational equity as a guiding principle shaping climate action. However,
I still consider myself from the youth part.
Yes, you are. We are.
20 years.
So I'm joining you soon now. However, in the MYCN, we believe that the voice of young people is not fully heard in policy-making processes, as it's not so easy for you to be consulted by governments. But youth organizations can find their strength within local and regional governments that have focused on place-based strategies, building on the strength of the territories in order to turn all these challenges into opportunities and to achieve the climate neutrality objective by 2015. So local and regional authorities and civil society are the ones who know best the needs of their territories to cope with their vulnerabilities, as well as the tool to implement their roadmaps. So thank you, Safa. Thanks again. We can switch the discussion toward the technology solutions, and let me get back to you, Mr. Ahmed. I would like to ask you what technology solutions are available for MENA countries for mitigating climate change, and what are the biggest hurdles facing MENA countries in implementing renewable energy? The floor is yours, Mr. Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much, Hajar. So actually, I would like to make a reference to World Bank and European Commission studies. Both are similar about what are the best technologies fit within the MENA region. Actually, before referring to this study, let me tell you something. If you look at the price and competition on price in the region, you find that Chinese have put the price in a very stagnant situation, that all prices for renewable energy is really become very affordable at all levels, starting with $8 per kilowatt hour, reaching now below $2, but this is a case in Amman, in Jordan. Needless to say that this number have been declined even further in the last bid that was awarded within UAE. So the reference to the World Bank and the European Commission study with regard to what type of technology from renewable energy perspective that would fit with the MENA countries, I would say whatever it fits with the local economy for attracting more jobs. Just to give an example, if you look for a country like Morocco to compare with Jordan, the highest share per capita for renewable energy that created jobs is in Jordan, based on solar PV. But if you look at it from Morocco perspective within the MENA region, you find it's a CSP. But if you go for Egypt, you will find that it's on equal foot basis between solar PV and onshore wind. This is very interesting because actually, are all affordable? Yes, they are all affordable in terms of priced kilowatt hour as per enforced tariff, because all countries in the MENA region are working or under what we call it regulated market. It's not free market, meaning that if you are, for example, in UK, you can select from your phone, from your smartphone, which supplier will provide you with electricity. But in all MENA countries, no, you basically have one set price of electricity, and you have to pay for it. So technology selection has two perspectives to look at it. One from socioeconomic perspective, second from affordability of investment, not affordability to pay. And it's a big difference. From the affordability on investment perspective at micro scale or even meso scale, going further up onto medium scale, it's basically for solar PV. But again, it's subject to the demographic condition from the cities level or regional from the country level, not regional from country to country or transnational country. And again, this is based on some kind of statistical analysis I made mainly to prepare for this discussion. But if you look at it from a socioeconomic perspective, it differs from one country to another. If you look for a country like Egypt, let me start to compare. Egypt has one of the top 10 mega scale for wind onshore projects. How much projects it created? It's actually more than 200,000 jobs for O&M as permanent jobs, mainly around environmental side. But if you look at it from Kingdom of Jordan perspective, you'll find it's more about solar PV. If you look at it from Morocco perspective, it's more for CSP. So it differs. But if I wanted to answer a question, I would like to say, how about it to enforce more renewable energy and mitigate climate change impact? Adaptation and mitigation level, I would say it's actually solar-related renewable energy, not solar PV, and it's a big difference between both. That solar now is used for what we call it accurate and or accuracy-based irrigation. That's basically solar PV application, which is very important. It's also for low cropping solar technology-based technologies, like for example, for rice cropping, for low and arid land. That's exactly working. Then what is the challenge? The challenge is to find or to tailor or to put the policy related for accessing funds for these type of projects. And here I would like to refer to another example that EBRD have created through what we call the Green Economy Financing Facility. That basically those development banks have a development mandate. They are not for investment only, like EBRD or like IBRD or World Bank. It's reconstruction and development. The development word or the D letter in their title head, it refers to specifically one thing. How can we tailor or develop policies around specific tailor-made financing solution to allow more access for those small-scale investors to provide more climate impact positively for sure, saving more CO2 while actually creating more jobs, and in the same time provide affordable technology with regard to within the country. And that is a challenge. Does it work? I'm sorry, does it work? Yes, it works. There is what we call it Green Economic Financing Facilities that was established with a lot of money in Morocco, Egypt, and Jordan. and actually was replicated at Jordanian economy level, but what we call it in Jordan, JREEF. I don't know who's the audience is aware of JREEF, or Jordan Renewable Energy and Economic Finance, and Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Facility that takes part of the large investors' electricity bill in order to put it on a margin for a fund for investing with accessible concessional funding for local investors. Does it work? Works very well. Does it work in Egypt? Yes. Egypt smuggled more than $250 million from EBRD with very concessional funding to local banks. So either working on some kind of borrowing, or what we call it in borrowing money from development banks with local concessional funding, or based on deducting the bill from larger consumer or energy intensive consumer like the case of Jordan, or relying on technology importer to save more money like the case of Morocco. It all works. But at the end, what's more important is to involve more civil society or civic organization society with local economy, not on advocacy level, which is very important as Noah explained. But what's really needed is to have their hand and their skin in the ground. Get them into the action. It's not advocacy anymore. They know. People in the street know. They know very well more than ours, because they are the one who really receiving the heat in the ground, and who are the one who needed funding to invest and to get more jobs, but also to get clean access to energy. And this actually, by the way, working with the stimulus package for the building back better for the impact of the pandemic. Get people in the ground, including civil society, to get more money, access to money, and to implement them at their hand, because they know, because they're taking part of the responsibility. This is what I would say how the technology-based solution should be in, meaning to summarize my answer, technology is mainly for most of developing economies in MENA countries. And again, as mentioned before, we're talking here about Mashriq and Maghrib. UCC have different type of technology, and basically don't have any kind of these problems. They also, their main issue now, they are transforming, and they're doing that nicely for non-oil-based economy. Despite they are still working on very large scale projects for solar PV to move from oil-based economy to non-oil-based economy, like the Sakaka solar farm in Saudi Arabia. But to this technology, yes, solar PV, when by statistical would be the answer, but at the end, what would fit for technology-based preferred option is what will basically fit with the demographic and socioeconomic needs, with the involvement of the local and civil society from within each country and each city and region from within each country. That's basically my answer, given these parameters that I just explained. And by the way, this is a model that was explained or basically developed before and enforced, starting with Germany more than 22 years ago, and it works very well. And it reached Germany to reach some Sundays in the summertime in Germany to have 100% from renewable. For sure, this is non-storage based solution, but still it works. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed. And for sure, I share with you the thought that to open and enable the access of renewable energy for everyone and make it more affordable, because as we are talking about inclusivity and mitigating while adapting and working on ensuring urban and social resilience, this mitigation solution needs to have an impact on the bill of each and every citizen. This is the only way we can get to their optional mean. Before giving you, Dr. Ahmed, you spoke about, you gave the examples about Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan, also some in GCC, but just wanted to have your opinion, just briefly. Which of these countries, not only those ones, which of the MENA countries have been faster adopting renewable energy, but in the horizon of hitting the net zero? Which of these countries is more willing to hit the net zero targets faster? We can't hear you. Dr. Ahmed, we can't hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was muting just to listen to you. Thank you very much for your smart question. Let me again answer this question from two different perspectives. If we look at it from and both are from the perspective of hitting net zero, most of the countries now approaching net zero by 2050. And actually, this question internally inside IRENA takes a lot of us to the sense that we are working now in developing what we call regional world energy outlook, given the energy transition mandate that IRENA is doing through the many of the countries, developed and developing economies. From the preparedness standpoint of the nationally determined contribution, actually, I would say that Morocco and Jordan are spearheading the MENA region from Mashriq and Maghreb. And again, they are in a different scale than GCC, because GCC have totally different energy mix and different socioeconomic dimension to be compared as a comparator. Because when you compare anything, Dr. Hajar, you have to look at it from the frame of reference. So GCC have totally different frame of reference. Like, for example, they have something, I believe this is the most important dimension that you have to mention. It's not discussed a lot, but have to be there. They have the best integrated electricity network within the 6 GCC countries, that these countries will never face any problem, regardless of oil-based or non-oil-based supply of their electricity. They have the most, they are even better than European Commission network by far, just to let you know that. As an engineer, I can tell you that. But if you look at it from per capita demand, you will find that Jordan is spearheading Morocco. But if you look at it from size of economy, you can see that Saudi Arabia comes first, Egypt comes second. It's all depending on the perspective and how you integrate to reach net zero by 2050. Reaching net zero, it means what? For example, if you are going to use as part of your energy mix by reaching net zero by 2050, going for blue hydrogen, still you're relying on a little bit with gas. Yes, to minimize the GHG emissions, but still to be there. But if you are going to rely on green hydrogen, you're reaching 100% net zero emission. But if you look at it, the definition of net zero of United States and European developed economy, the net zero 50 by 2050 is totally something different, because they are working more on energy efficiency. Looking at energy efficiency as the most clean renewable energy part in order to reach net zero, I would say that Tunisia is #1 country. But again, for an overall, if you look at the impact on the people, Jordan comes first as per capita demand. Again, this comparison does not prefer saying that this country is preferring on the other. It's a matter of, as we say, race towards 2050, and it's something of the allowed discussion and dialogue at the European, at the UN Secretary General forum that's currently taking place. But what I wanted to say at the end, there is very important number I have to say here, Dr. Hajar, and I wouldn't take more of the discussion time, that actually 50% of needed investments to reach net zero at global level, including MENA countries, is at micro and meso level. This calls that any action on all these countries in the years to come, specifically from now until 2030, which is the Paris Agreement target deadline, or even more until 2050, it has to come from enforcing more civil action in the ground and more access to and crowd in by local banks through civil action organization to take more responsibility and skin in the game of implementing these projects. And this is really what I would say, if there will be added value or some kind of summary lesson for this discussion, is to how can we put further the more action and more enforcement in terms of policies for civil action organization to take part of implementing these projects at regional level. This is what needed. 50% of more than 25 trillion, not billion, dollars of investment until 2050 comes from that side of clean energy and climate mitigation and adaptation side. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bad, for this very interesting insights. And yes, of course, the civil actors can be meaningfully engaged in the green transition and promote the green jobs agenda, driving towards transition to a net zero, for sure. Safa, back to you. but still within the civil action activity, a significant amount of mitigation and adaptation projects are taking place in several countries in the region. Are these countries engaging with civil society when planning for climate mitigation? And if so, how do they ensure the participatory approach?
It's a really hard question, Hajar, because you cannot speak about civil society without talking about freedom of speech and freedom of expression in our region and the participatory approach in general. So and unfortunately, we lack freedom of speech in our region. And there are a lot of downsizing of civil society and uprooting civil society in general in all levels. So when it comes to environmental issues and the climate change in specific, it's a little bit different for different reasons. One of them, because it's not a real threat for the government. Environment and the climate change, usually when we speak about it, it's not they usually hear us and we work with the government. But again, anyone who work on climate change with another cross culture, with a cross-cutting issue, it's really hard on them. So between Gulf, maybe Morocco, Jordan, Tunisia, civil society engagement in both adaptation and mitigation, comparing to other areas other than environment and the climate change, has been amazing. When you compare it to other issues. So, for example, in UAE, there is the climate change ministry, and the minister have been engaging with experts, with youth, and with others, and the ministry. So there has been, the voices has been heard. Also in Morocco, civil society, and Hajar, you know better, has been working closely. Maybe it's harder for the younger ones, but the older and maybe the most historic NGOs are working closely with the government. Also in Jordan, it has been back and forth, to be honest. So it depends on the minister and the current cabinet. So it really depends. But in general, there has been, and now, for example, with the NDCs, I know that a lot of countries has worked closely with the civil society and asked them to come over to discuss the NDCs before submitting them to the UNFCCC back before COP21. And now I know for a fact that the government has been working in some countries with civil society actors and other non-state actors on reviewing their NDCs to submit them again, because we know that the NDCs that we are having now are not meeting the target, and it's so far away from it. So yeah, so when you talk about civil society, you cannot say civil society in general. And it's hard in our region, and it's very unfortunate because we know that there is too much energy in the civil society that needs to be reflected in different approaches. But specifically for environment and climate change, it's a little bit different. So far, I can say we are lucky.
Yes, thank you, Safa. Well, you're right. It is very different from country to another. While talking about the engagement of civil society in national and subnational planification, but I agree with you. In Morocco, the participatory approach has been strengthened by the new constitution since 2011. And for sure, we are working in Morocco within alliances, a big alliance for climate and sustainable development, holding more than 800 NGO, environmental NGO, and we are participating as much as we are afforded to in the planification. I know that in Jordan, you are very active too. A lot of NGOs are very making their views and their voice heard. In Tunisia also, but it is a little bit different in other countries like Egypt or Algeria or Libya or else. Back to Nuha. It is vital for developing countries to manage climate and disaster risk proactively and efficiently, to not compromise the development plans and the achievements of the SDGs. What are the opportunities in the Arab world to implement disaster risk reduction and urban resilience projects? Which countries have been more susceptible to change, according to you, Noha?
Okay, so thank you for the interesting question, Hada. I think the key, I would say, word here for addressing that response is the word of integration. And integration here, I would like to reflect on it on three different levels. The first level is the level of integration of resilience and climate adaptation.
Noha, Dr. Noha,
yeah.
Would you please
Yes.
raise your voice or the sound, please? We have in trouble hearing you well. Kindly, please.
Okay, sure. Is that any better now?
Thank you. Yes. Many thanks.
Okay.
Many thanks.
Okay, great. So the first where I was speaking about integration, the first component of integration that needs to be considered is the integration of adaptation and resilience funding into sectoral budgets. And this is something that has been raised many times and has been always an ongoing discussion when we apply urban resilience assessments and supporting cities with developing their action plans. How budgets are going to be dedicated in order to implement those plans. And the key answer always here that it needs to be integrated and funding investments within resilience into the actual development plan. So for example, if we are speaking about transportation infrastructure, transportation infrastructure budget in itself, when it's first initiated at the national level, needs to ensure that investments in transport resilience is actually embedded into that budget, and it's consistent and synergetic from the beginning. And this in itself actually it helps the local governments by the end stage of, for example, applying for climate financing. And this is something that have been brought up in the first panel by our colleague from Jordan, Ruba, I believe, when in putting their proposals. If this is something that is integrated into the sectoral budget from the beginning, then it's very easy actually to make that tracking for the budget tagging and expenditure on climate adaptation and mitigation actions, and then that would help them in applying for those finances. The other element of integration is actually at the public policies level. And this is something that also relates a lot into the point that have been raised by my colleague, Dr. Ahmed, earlier, in terms of the state-owned enterprises who are actually key players when it comes into implementing resilience in strategic industries, whether we are speaking of energy, water, transportation, communication. Those actors are actually responsible for much of the public investments in these areas. And if they are actually integrating resilience plans and resilience measures at the beginning, whether we are speaking about their objectives, targets, and actually the statements that they develop for corporate intents and performance contracts, then that would be easier for the government to trace them and then develop their national strategies accordingly. Other thing that also needs to be considered when we speak about resilience assessments and working are actually on the disaster resilience scorecard, or even observing very closely other resilience assessment tools and frameworks that we have, whether from the 100RC, the Rockefeller Foundation, and other organizations. I think a very important component that needs to be considered, specifically that we are speaking about climate change now, that we need to consider the impact of climate change on economic growth, and certain indicators need to be integrated into those frameworks in terms of the economic variables. And here we are speaking about when we, for example, if I would like to highlight on the issue around technology, I think a very interesting example that we can bring here is a tool that has been launched by the UN office, and I was part of the TOT program for that tool, which is called the Sindai Monitor. So it's an online tool that helps national governments to track progress on reporting on disaster losses and economic losses, basically, and damages. But what is interesting about this tool that it also reports on the SDGs and specifically SDG 11 targets. So I believe adopting more of these technologies that can actually build coherence between those global agreements, whether we're speaking about Sendai, the SDGs, the climate change agreements. I think developing technologies that can help countries to report in a more cohesive manner is very important, not only in terms of the times and the capacity that governments take in reporting into those targets, but actually in translating those targets into action. Because I believe that with what we see now, you've brought up a very interesting point in terms of, for example, the efforts that civil society organizations are putting on the ground, the numbers of those organizations who are actually reporting into those agreements. But I believe a common challenge that we have across the region, and it needs to be really addressed, whether from the institutional level or from the operational side, is actually the monitoring and evaluation of actions on the ground. Because if I give an example from my background and the work that the UN office have adopted by the Making Cities Resilient campaign, this campaign was first launched, I think, around 2010, 2012, and we have over, I would say, 2,000 cities that have signed at that time. From the Arab region alone, we had over 300 cities. But when we came into the reporting mechanism, although we had around 40 model cities that were considered as model in terms of the actions that they are taking. So, for example, we spoke earlier in the first panel about the 100 RC, the work that Amman have done in developing the resilience action plan. It's fascinating. But then the question is, what's next? What is the impact on the ground? I believe that we really need to put efforts on monitoring, evaluation, not only in capturing the gaps, but actually to capturing the good stories and being able to transfer the knowledge from one organization to the other, from one city to the other, from one country to the other, and have that more of, I would say, a cohesive approach of how do we adapt and respond to those global indicators.
Thank you, Nuha, because I was just going to jump on the question of the coherence. So I know you have been working a lot on building this coherence, and you already mentioned now that you have been working on the tool and implementing a new tool and getting the targets between the SDGs, the Sendai framework, and the other frameworks. If I think someone someone from the audience is asking also for the name of the tool. We'll be addressing this in the Q&A session later. Thank you so much, Dr. Nuha. Before to go to the final question, just wanted to ask Dr. Ahmed Badr, in your opinion, just briefly in 2 minutes, how can transnational cooperation between the non-state actors be strengthened to increase climate ambition in the MENA region, while creating economic wealth and social well-being, of course?
Yeah, I will try to be very quick for these 2 minutes. Actually, it's a very simple, Hajar, is exactly by creating regional funds that works and serving all non-state actors, allowing for South-to-South cooperation to be the methodology for transferring knowledge. I think it worked very well before by European Union, but at research and development. But I think it's now the right moment that this could be scaled up to be at the investment level, specifically at micro and medium scale investment level. This could be easily done. All what needed to be happen, and I think inside IRENA, I have to say that I'm working on that now to make sure that non-state actor will be basically having the skin on the game for any investment through regional funds that are being targeted for some regional proximity region, like for example, MENA region, like what we talked today, but also in other regions like Southeast Asia or Latin America, or even small island developing states. I think this is what we are working on. It's I have to say it's a huge challenge, but we are working on that. But that's very easy because this will allow transnational cooperation and transfer of knowledge within the same proximity or geographical proximity and same proximity a proximity of cultural heritage to exchange information and experiences and to work together. That's exactly, and I can see that's really happening between from within the MENA region and MENA countries. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bat. It's very interesting indeed, and I think in the MENA region we have so much in common, so much to share, and so much to learn from each other, and a great platform for cooperation and to go further from the point we are now. Thank you all for your valuable contributions. And before we end up, I would like to ask a final question to the three of you. You can answer in the order you like, but ladies first, of course. How are local and regional governments implementing renewable energy solutions through enabling the cities in their broader environments? And on the other hand, how do they contribute to shaping urban equitability and environmental sustainability in a way that delivers an upgraded community in a much holistic approach? The floor is yours, starting with the ladies.
Safa, would you like to go ahead since you have the topic?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Maybe on a less technical note, I wanted to say that both regional and national governments and also international, if they want to have real climate change solutions that takes into consideration sustainable urbanization and a sustainable resilience city, they need to, the bottom-up approach is the key. The community voices, community solutions, and native knowledge is a key to do that. And most of the governments in the region are doing that, not all of them. So from, as I said, bottom up. So we know, for example, in Jordan, there is a huge number of permaculture projects. There are huge numbers of water management techniques, also in Morocco, in Tunisia, and even in countries under a very harsh political situation. So we saw in Gaza, in occupied Palestine, in Syria even, there are a lot of, because with those circumstances usually comes up great inventions and solutions to climate change. And actually the government in some countries, and for example in Lebanon, are hearing them out, and they are reflecting that on their urbanization. So for example, Greater Amman municipality in Jordan, in the Amman city, are doing those consultations with people who are innovative and with civil society. So I'll leave it here so I know we are very strict in time.
Thank you, Safa. Dr. Noha?
Yes, sorry, I needed to jump off. It's the time to break our fast. So I'm going to make it very quick. In terms of, I believe that in order to contribute to shaping urban equability and environmental sustainability, I believe transparency in data sharing and giving the communities the ownership of understanding why renewable energy is important, why adopting renewable energy solution is fundamental for building resilience at the societal level and also at the institutional level. So having shared standards in terms of data processing, analyzing, and modeling representation, I believe is very, very important to implementing any form of urban governance solutions. Once applied, then we can definitely agree that awareness raising and adopting those principles of ownership can be integrated at the community level, at the civil society level, the private sector play a significant role once they have the buy-in on and actually those investments, and then be able to support the municipal governance financing when it comes into adopting renewable solutions. So wrapping up, I think not only the national level, but local level as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Noha. Back to you, Dr. Brad, if you can give us your views on the wrap-up question. please.
No, actually, I would like to build on what Safa and Noha mentioned specifically about bottom-up approach, about involving also local community in basically in the physical mobilization or in this mobilization. One important aspect I would like to add here, translating this bottom-up approach and involving and crowding in local actors and the regional community, it has to happen from the one important actor we never talked about, but he is the key here. This is actually the ministries of finance. Because as you all know, in any government, if you would like to start, the key is where is the money, and you put your hand on the money. The hand on the money on what we call it MTEF. Sorry that sometimes I speak financial language. MTEF is standing for medium-term expenditure forecast. It's exactly like any other mother or woman that we learn when she has a budget to manage the house. She has to start at the first of the month to look what disbursement plans she has for the whole month to disperse. This is exactly the MTEF, but at the government level. So from that point, it has to be a mobilization of decision making to consider regional funding to be delegated and to be allocated within these MTEF plans in each Ministry of Finance, to say this money will go for this kind of renewable energy or climate change impact finance with such a kind of financing share, so that they have part of the game and to be implemented by them. By that will ensure sustainability because they have skin on the game, they have shared the responsibility, will involve state actors from the beginning of the plans of the medium-term expenditure forecast that happens every either 3 or 5 years for each government for modern MENA region. This is my final conclusion, adding or capitalizing on starting with what Noha and Safa mentioned. Thank you, I stop here. There will be one question, Dr. Hajar, that has to be answered when it comes to it came from the Q&A, but I will leave it to the end when you give us the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you all. You mentioned the transparency and supporting, strengthening the MRV process within the national and subnational level, and shaping that how the importance of data that would shape and build a way to the equitably sustainable approach for the resilience and the mitigation adaptation programs. You also based also on the awareness raising and the community outreach. Dr. Badr, happy to hear about that, the capitalizing of the investments and how there are tools that can support the local or national Ministry of Finances to implement the climate action in an equitable and inclusive way. Thank you all. I think we still have a few times for the Q&A. We have a question, I think it's for Dr. Badr, and also Noha. You may answer, whoever wants to answer it. Can you shed light on current and future potential role of green bonds in the MENA, particularly unlocking private capital for financing renewable energy projects?
Yes, thank you. Actually, to highlight on that, there is a couple of trials. One of them, I will talk about it, which basically Egypt, that was happened in last September, that called for green bonds. And the aim was to target for $750 million at maturity rate of 5 years and with the interest rate up to 2.5. And actually, it had basically become successful. The transaction advisor was, I think, BNP Paribas, led by several banks, but the lead transactional advisor was BNP Paribas, and it was very successful. They mobilized more than 2.5 billion, and actually this has moved to the better enhanced maturity condition that Egypt Central Bank has enjoyed very much, and that's really good example. I'm not aware with any other exercises, but let me give some important elements here for any kind of green bond. Is the future for green bond? Yes, very much. Yes, actually, it now after pandemic, it moved to more need for the global economies, specific developed economies. And if you look at International Exchange Bourse of London, actually looked at very important element when EBRD looked for some kind of green bonds for supporting CEMID region, basically covering Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, and adding to it Libya in the near future to come. It has mobilized a lot of money. But there is one important element here for any kind of green bond. It's all about the main institutional framework structure at the calling institution or at the calling economy. There must be some kind of a stable economy for a country to look at any kind for developed economies or investor to invest in. And that's really the challenge. You must have a very matured, stable economy for at least past 3 years by the big 3 names like Standard & Poor's, like Moody's. That's basically has to be in. So, for example, of Egypt to capitalize on is basically have B- over the past 4 years as a stable standard format rating, and that's exactly called for the success of green bonds. But the future there, yes. Why? To give you very important numbers, that the last information or the last report of IRENA, that the level of investment in 2019 was almost $800+ billion of investment in renewable energy. Now, okay, what is needed to reach Paris Agreement targets by 2030 is the need of $2.5 trillion per year. So there is a need to call for triple of this investment, mainly come from private sector. To come from that, only and only green bonds coming for this front in order to match all these needed investments. Will it be happening in the future? Yes, it will. Maybe we can take that offline, given the time limit we have now. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bad. Before leaving you, another question for you, addressed to you, which is about, could you, Dr. Ahmed, speak more about green and blue hydrogen and how the massive investment he spoke about would be utilized? Also, how can we realistically expect trillions in investments considering the current pandemic-induced economic crisis?
Yeah, I will start. I will speak very quickly, and we can take that offline. I have my email address, and any of the colleagues. I'm sorry to refer to Natasha, but she can give my email address, and I will gear all colleagues here for questions to more answer. But briefly to answer the questions that the future is coming in from now, that most of developed economies, including UAE, are looking for more investment in green hydrogen. But the affordability and the commerciality dimension is not yet there. So it needs, at least in our estimation in IRENA, another 3 to 5 years. What's mainly coming now in order to mature hydrogen as renewable energy, specifically along the storage part, similar to the CSP, is basically we are working more, or basically investment is driving more by private sector towards blue hydrogen. Green is coming, but it needs more technology advancing, and in that front, UAE, Spain, and Germany is taking the lead. You can follow up with me later, and I can connect with the question requesters to my colleagues in the Innovation and Technology Center in Germany. I have more information, but I can take, because it's a very complicated background here, I need to explain. But in a nutshell, all about the structure of the metallurgical. I'm an engineer by background, with the metallurgical alloy in order to make it more conducive to receive heat. I know it's a very technical, complicated, but we can discuss that offline with the person who asked this question. Going to the second question about how realistically we expect millions, actually, and mainly through private sector. Is the private sector requesting that? Yes, I can tell you from IRENA standpoint that developed economies and asset-based funds like Blackstone and BlackRock, they are ready to invest more. Like, for example, Rockefeller is now just launched $1 billion fund in order to invest in small and medium scale of grid solutions. So that's really the future through cities. And it has to be like that. Our numbers and our analysis led by me and IRENA had basically or basically in English language correct, by Irina and myself, I have to say it's basically revealing that more than 50% of the needed investment will be at medium and small scale at off-grid solutions. So money is there. It's all needing of investable, bankable ideas. Is that investable idea there? Yes. In 1 year, we collected more than 215 ideas. Out of them, 50 projects are bankable, and we are now getting them or facilitating them with investment financier, not only from MDBs, but also from private sector. And the case is mainly in scaling up in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a very positive sign. Again, if you would like to have more answers and more information, you can direct me through email from Natasha and provide more needed answers through what we call it Climate Investment Platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Badr. I think we responded to all the questions. Dr. Nuha took care of the last one about the Sendai monitor. Thank you so much. Thank you again for the interesting discussion. And before we leave this Zoom session, I would like to thank all the speakers, especially thanks to the organizers in the Harvard Graduate School of Design and their partners, especially Natasha, the organizer Natasha, and the partners from RCA, Medina, and Carboun for enabling us to meet and exchange in this fruitful event. Many thanks, and looking forward to meeting you again in other events, and have صحفتكم.
Thank you all for
very
joining.
much. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Lovely meeting you.
Bye-bye. Bye.